Tracy Ashland. Deidre Cromie. Jennifer Hedderly. Abby Knopper. Ed Lowing.
Here.
Pat Markovich. Keith Reckdahl.
Here.
Council Schmidt.
So, Pat is not here, she is one person from Stacy. And we have a early departure of 10:30 for that. Before we carry on with some of the subjects. I know. Okay, and we do have a forum, just for the record. Are there any agenda changes or requests or deletions or switches in event order? All right. So then, the next item on the agenda is oral communication, so anyone from the public can speak on any subject of their choice. Seeing no cards, we'll move on to the business matters of the meeting. First is the approval of draft minutes for the August 27th, 13 meeting that has been circulated in the packet.
On line 106, it's page 3. We're talking about the funding for the planting of the trees. I believe the answer was that the trees that were going to be planted on the golf course would be paid by the golf course budget, but those outside of the golf course, it was uncertain how that'd be paid. Is that correct, Rob?
That is correct. So, yeah, if there's mitigation, which there will be, near site or off site, that is not yet in the golf course budget. That funding would need to be identified.
And what does that take to get that in the budget? Is that the council has to act on that, or is that just you?
Let me clarify, it's not currently in the golf course budget. But
Okay.
if, you know, we're going through the EIR process, and there's a variety of mitigations that's gonna call for, including tree mitigation. And as that plan starts to develop and goes beyond the boundaries of the golf course, say, then we'll have to build those costs into
To
the
it, okay.
construction budget.
Would it be in the JPA budget?
Some of it, to the extent that JPA's impact on trees, which they are. So both, there's mitigation requirements both for the JPA and the city of Palo Alto.
Okay. Deirdre, Commissioner Cromie?
In that same area, I was just a little bit confused about the meaning on line 99. Where Passmore replies, we do want to prioritize replacing the value in the Baylands. Foothill area will be a low priority. So did you want to say replacing the tree value?
I just kept using the word value.
Okay.
But if that's what he meant.
We want to put the value? I don't know. Replacing the value. It just seemed a little awkward to me.
Yeah, it is.
Or, I'm wondering what the right word is, because it could be beyond trees. And there's value in additional
Aesthetics.
wetlands and other, yeah.
So just say, just replace the value.
Ecosystem values.
Plant
put
materials
that in.
of equal value.
It's not always materials, I guess, because there's aesthetic value, so maybe that is why you,
Ecosystem?
yeah,
Say
just
that?
put that. Or natural environment value, natural environment. And then, I don't know if this is really correct that he said it's on the next line, 101, the farther we get away from the history, the ecosystem struggles to adapt. This was in reference to my question on there is a thriving grasslands habitat there now, so it doesn't quite make sense to imply that habitat is not thriving. He pretty much agreed that it was. So I would just strike that sentence. I think it's a little misleading.
I think that's where he was saying that it used to be tree lands up at
Right,
Foster
it
Joe,
used to
right?
be a woodlands habitat, and now it's a thriving grasslands habitat. So to sort of say that as you get past,
I can
I,
start it.
I don't recall if he said that or not, but
yeah.
I know that was the point that he was making, so.
Right.
I just, I'm reluctant to strike it, because if it's something he said,
Well, then I'd like
but
you to
then he can
balance
clarify,
it, if you
yeah.
can, or go back to the tape and clarify that it is a thriving grasslands habitat. That, I asked him that question and he pretty much agreed. But then he qualified it with this historical perspective, but it didn't mean that it's not thriving right now.
Okay.
I think he was saying, I think that was a general comment that he was making about habitat and not a specific comment. You could even add the words "in general" if you want to that. Okay, that's it for me.
Abby?
Yeah, just real simple little typo. On line 130, birds, comma, which can lead to, there just needs to be a little space between lead and to. That's it.
I have a few comments, actually. Let's see. Line 50. Something doesn't read right about that. Citizens Committee to complete the refuse. Sounds like, I think that's what's supposed to be, right? Refuge?
Oh.
And it should be capital,
Capital R?
capitalized. No, the Citizens Committee to complete.
Oh, yeah. Right.
That's the name I've heard.
Name of the org, yeah.
Yeah.
56, it's the wrong there, but you can correct that. At the top of page 3, I believe that's when commissioner comments started. So down through page 82. Down page through line 82, Catherine, is comments from the public. And I don't see a transition to comments from park, which I believe starts before line 83. Okay, sorry, 65 then?
Commissioner comments and questions?
Yeah, if we could just make it clear that that's where the comments start from the commissioners. Obviously, I didn't find it until I was just referenced. Yeah,
Yeah.
as it was with public comments, that's kind of what the clue I was looking for.
Subheading. Oh, yeah. On line 49.
I also wasn't quite clear about 114. It's best to establish trees during natural rainfall water. I don't know what the reference is there.
Might have been season.
Speaking about planting season,
Yeah,
and that it's best.
So in winter?
season.
It's fall, I think, as I recall, because October, November planting.
Capital F.
So establish trees in fall.
During the natural rainfall.
Okay, so let's insert in fall there so it's clear. And let's see. Perhaps 158 should also be boldface commission comments. Some of these questions seem to not have replies. So on 170, are there issues of feeding wildlife and feral cats in urban parks? There was no reply to that. Just kind of hanging there, so.
What line is that one?
170. And I'm not even quite sure what the meaning is, but, because we talked about that for quite a while, but. And then just a clarification on 176. It kind of makes it sound like Commissioner Hederly wrote this ordinance. So if we could have this motion made by Commissioner Hederly and seconded to adopt the ordinance as written, goes down after the name Cromie. I mean, she's a capable attorney and writer, but I don't think she actually wrote this piece. Also, do we get, on line 216, did we get an answer to that went in the minutes, that should go in the minutes? The difference between CIP budget and operating budget? I thought, actually, Rob, that you probably answered that. I think it was a question from Keith.
Where are we?
216.
Oh, line 216.
Okay, I'm sure we talked about that. We can add something
I mean, the answer is yes, so I don't know if you elaborated or not. I'm skipping a few things here. 222, looks like it should be Staff Anderson provided what improvements the park will be undergoing,
Or described the improvements.
or described, yeah. So that's 222, 223.
There's also a typo in line 244.
Yeah, I'm kind of skipping the typos, but there are some, yeah. 234 and 235, perhaps we don't need to make that more specific. It was more specific from the gentleman, Mr. Modolo, in terms of why police had to be called to, break up particular groups. So I'm just always sensitive to these things going to council, and we want to report, exactly what's happening there, so.
What line was that?
234, 235. Uh, 245, just for clarity, this question, what were the other suggested locations? That's in Scott Park, not around the area. So if we could just insert after locations in Scott Park.
Can I ask a question about the last one, that the police have to be called? Because this is a comment directly from the public.
Right.
So, we don't typically respond in the minutes to what the public's saying. So
No.
the public member saying police have had to be called several times.
If that's all they said in the transcript, that's fine. I thought he was saying there were groups of young people and there was unsavory behavior and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay.
I definitely, I only want to have the facts reported, but,
Yeah.
what they were called for might be a material fact. Then over on the last page, 287, it's important to note that Commissioner Markovich's comments relative to the Brown Act applied to meetings outside of the commission meetings. It could be misconstrued that we should all be sitting 6 feet away from each other and not talking, so just for clarity. I don't understand item 5 on page 295, line 295.
I can clarify that one, or somebody else can.
Go ahead.
I believe that's NPR, not NPR, National Public Radio.
N as in Nancy?
As in national,
okay.
yeah. National Public Radio. I believe that was the story regarding the website unaccessible. I believe Commissioner Headley mentioned that. Not that the NPR was creating a website, but that they reported on.
They're creating a database on their website, including all accessible playgrounds nationally.
296, obviously, it's in front of us now, so it's the fee for service study, which should be itemized there, has not gone to Finance Committee. In a period or semicolon, it is scheduled for September. Um, 297, Enjoy, of course, is capitalized. 298, obviously, this is the interview for Parks and Recreation Master Plan vendor. That's all I have. Anyone else who hasn't? Okay, Commissioner Heatherly. Oops.
All right, line 77. That sentence is a little confusing. Less than 2 feet tall, supplemental water, they will 80 to 90% survival. Maybe after tall, insert with. So less than 2 feet tall with supplemental water, not they, will be 80 to 90% survival rate. get that? Okay. Line 134. Oh, no, I don't have a question about that. Line 205. Staff Anderson highlighted specific park CIPs and quoted some examples that are used. I think just put a period after examples and delete that are used, because the examples were the CIPs. 214 and 15. This was confusing to me. Maybe you can clarify it a little. Infrastructure reserve, does that grid change year to year? And the reply was master plan for funding criteria, not just the scoring.
Infrastructure reserve, does the grid?
That's funny,
I think the answer is yes, it does change. I have to go back and look at
Okay.
what's said there.
The next bullet point too, so you might as well.
Yeah, which is how does the CIP differ from the operating budget?
Yeah.
Add some language there.
All right, then on line 281, it was a little confusing the way it's written. I would change it to say, Council Schmidt commented that the work, and then delete that so commented that the work of the park has made a difference. So delete been working on has. You still with me?
Yep.
In the passage of, delete so the passage of items that have come before a council. He emphasized the benefits of, instead of need to get, the commission's feedback to the council regarding the smoking ban, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
That's it for me. And there are a lot of typos, so another run
We're
through
gonna have to,
for typos would be great. And commission is always capital when you're referring to the commission.
Yeah, that doesn't make for exciting television for our viewers out there, but it's just really essential to get this stuff communicated correctly, because council's reading what we have to say about these things, and the public, so. Yeah, Keith, do you have
one
another?
more. On 103, this is on page 3. I believe the comment says source of North Carolina was too far away. I think that was the expert.
Oh, yeah, I had that corrected in mine. I forgot to say it, yeah.
It wasn't the source of the grass, but the source of our expert. Our expert was based out of North Carolina.
Thank you.
And I think it was Deirdre thought it was,
Yeah.
it'd be nice to get someone local that knew something about that grass, but with a local bent.
Thank you for catching that. I had that.
Okay, can we have a motion to approve as corrected and amended?
Can I ask you a question more?
Okay, before that?
The minutes is an interesting challenge for us. I think both commission and staff, and we spend a lot of time preparing it, and often it seems like we don't quite get it right. So one thing that Catherine and I have been talking about is the idea of having verbatim minutes. There are actually services that do this. They do it for council, they do it for the finance committee, and it's fairly low cost as far as I can tell. And I think it would save a lot of time, staff time, and we would capture exactly what people say. Still obviously have to read through those. And I'm curious what the commission thinks of that. Would you think that would be a good thing, or is there a downside to doing that? I'm not sure I can think of one right away.
Yeah, I think one of the downsides is if there's a long discussion that can be summarized in a couple sentences, the council, whoever's reading it, has to dig through a lot to get to the gist of the arguments or just of the discussion.
That's true. I mean, that gets it, although when we go to council with staff reports, we usually summarize everything in the staff report. You know, that's certainly a lot of effort is put into that.
But we do hope they read our minutes every month.
Yeah, all right, okay.
Yeah, the advantage of verbatim is when an issue is important to you, you can go directly there and read the details. Summarize minutes, you can say, oh, that's interesting, I wish I knew more about it. The cost issue has shown up in other commissions and boards, and The problem with going outside is it becomes a specific budget item someone has to pay for. When you do it, it's hidden in staff time, so you never acknowledge how expensive it is. Just a budgeting
Well,
issue.
Do you have the money to do it?
It's, we have to figure out exactly how much that costs, but it's fairly low cost as far as we can tell. And I think it builds internal capacity, because Catherine spends quite a number of hours actually on this, and then, as you can tell, we have to go back and redo a whole bunch of it as well, and just, if we didn't have to do that, then all of a sudden she has more time to spend on community gardens and the many other things that she's responsible for. So, I think we would, in the end, be more productive and save money in that sense. But I just want to get it right, because it seems like we're struggling with this.
Yeah, I mean, we could try it once, see how that worked out, just, as a test market, and think up some other ways that it could work as well.
Thank you.
Is that okay? All right, so let's go back to, are we going to approve this set of minutes as corrected?
I move so.
Okay?
Should move to approve.
To approve, right. In a second? Abby does. Okay, great. All in favor of corrected and amended? Thank you. Okay, the next item of business is a presentation from the Friends of Palo Alto Parks. I'd like to ask Liz Hogan to come forward, use one of our mics here, sit at the table, and tell us.
This is the president.
That's right.
Friends of Palo Alto Parks, so welcome.
Press the button there to turn it on, so you're on broadcast. Great.
Okay, thank you. Friends of the Palo Alto Parks is a good story, and I'm happy to tell it. We have been around for almost 10 years. We were incorporated in December 2003 as a nonprofit 501c3 corporation. The 501c3 status is key. That means that all donations to Friends of the Palo Alto Parks, whether they be for a specific park fund or for the general fund, are tax deductible. Money that is raised for or donated to a specific park stays in that park's fund until needed. Money that goes into the general fund is spent on a park at the discretion of the board. We are a small board of 8. As per our charter, we do not have a general membership. We meet once a month, 10 months of the year, during the noon hour at the office of one of our board members. Our mission is to enrich, enhance, beautify, and promote Palo Alto's parks and open spaces. We work with the city, with other nonprofits, with local businesses, and with interested parties. We have had many successes in the past 10 years and have raised over $850,000 for Palo Alto's parks and open spaces. Our first major project was Heritage Park. When Heritage Park was being developed, money was tight, and the city did not have the budget for amenities and a playground. And the neighbors really wanted a playground. So Friends of the Palo Alto Parks raised money for benches and some trash receptacles, and we facilitated the formation of the Heritage Park Playground LLC. Together, Friends of the Palo Alto Parks and the Heritage Park Playground LLC raised over $200,000 for the playground. Because of the public-private partnership, there was latitude in the design. One feature of the playground that I really like is the wall of personalized hand-painted tiles. Parents and grandparents and groups and individuals bought these tiles as which was for a fundraiser. Another neat playground feature is a dolphin, which was a gift from a member of the community, and kids just love to play on that dolphin. Our second major project was Litton Plaza. Friends of the Palo Alto Parks, the Downtown Business Association, and the City of Palo Alto, in a public-private partnership, renovated Litton Plaza. The idea started simply when Lee Levy, one of our board members, thought it would be nice to add a water feature to the plaza, and the rest is history. The Downtown Business Association and the city continue to keep an eye on things there. Very recently, 3 freestanding umbrellas were added to create shade and visual interest. There was money left over in the Litton Plaza account, so money from that account went toward the umbrellas. And thanks to the streets team for doing such a great job in maintaining the plaza. A current major project is Magical Bridge. Magical Bridge is a playground that will be accessible to children and adults of all abilities. The city has given the land in Mitchell Park, and the Friends of the Magical Bridge LLC, which we sponsor, is in the process of raising the money to develop the land into a park. The design has been done. I'm not sure that it's been finalized. And Olenka Villarreal, who is on our board, is spearheading the project. She's working with the city and outside vendors on equipment and continues to work on fundraising. It took a long time to launch this project, but with Olenka's determination and strong support from the city, it is now well on its way. Most of the money for Magical Bridge is in pledges and is therefore not included in the $850,000 that I mentioned earlier that we have raised to date. Occasionally, we apply for grants. Several years ago, we applied for and received a grant of $20,000 from the Rotary Club for educational displays at Pearson Arastradero Preserve. On a smaller scale and with money from our general fund, a few things that we have sponsored. We contributed $2,000 to the Wi-Fi project at Eleanor Cogswell Plaza. We funded a timeline display at Juana Briones Park. And just within the last month, we sponsored a replacement bench at the Baylands. Greg Betts had mentioned that the bench at the mouth of San Francisco Creek was in bad shape, and he was right. The new bench, a 20-minute walk from the Nature Center, provides a pleasant and quiet place to rest and take in an expansive view of the Baylands. Cost of the replacement bench plus installation runs about $2,000. Friends is more than talking money. We work. We have an ongoing project that is literally hands-on. For the last 5 years, Friends and the Palo Alto Kiwanis have partnered to plant and maintain beds at Rinconada Park. Once a month for 2 hours, we weed and clip and prune. Periodically, we mulch. As needed, we plant. The city provides the mulch, and the city has the best mulch, and the city provides the plants. Our first project at Rinconada was the circular rose garden in the center of the park by the tennis courts, and it was in desperate need of help. So the bed was cleared, the soil prepared, and the carpet roses were put in. The Bermuda grass has been a battle, but is one we are winning. We also work on the bed near the park sign at Embarcadero and on the large bed under an evergreen near the pool. We now keep an eye on the native plant garden, which is next to the Echo House. Actera planted the garden, and Mark Ribeiro asked us if we would be willing to take on the maintenance. At the city's request, we have provided labor for a couple of special projects. In early September of 2011, Mark asked us if we would spruce up Memorial Grove at Eleanor Pardee Park in commemoration of the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And earlier this year, Greg asked if we would lend a hand at Lucy Stern. We replanted the entryway to the courtyard and the planter in the courtyard that was originally a fountain. 12 of us worked for 2 hours, digging holes and putting in about 250 plants, from shrubs to perennials. The results were well worth the effort, and I encourage you to take a look if you haven't already. We are always looking for more help. Sometimes neighbors lend a hand, as do members of the Lawn Bowls Club. The Garden Club is just starting to participate. If any of you are interested, you can let me know. This work is very satisfying. And that's our story to date. I have a fact sheet on Friends of the Palo Alto Parks, which I will distribute. And we have a website. The web address is on the fact sheet, as is a phone number. If you call the phone number, you'll get Roger Smith. It's his number. And we don't have a Friends email address. It's just all personal emails. So thank you for being interested in Friends of the Palo Alto Parks. And here's a fact sheet. It's called Did You Know? And
Commissioners have any questions?
Thank you for your presentation and your,
oh, there.
and thank you for all the beautiful work that you do.
Oh.
Really appreciate it. Can you were speaking somewhat quickly, and can you talk a little bit about how your membership works? I didn't quite catch that.
Oh, we
If you
don't.
you don't have
We don't have a
it.
general membership. No.
How do you decide if you're, so are you a closed group then? Do you ever bring in new people to the group? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, we have a board of 8 people, and I think that according to our bylaws, we can have up to 12 or something like that. but we do not have a general membership. And I think the idea among the co-founders was that if we had a general membership, then it becomes a different kind of group, that you have to service the membership. And the idea was just really concentrate on working on parks. But we're always open to new board members, and anybody who would like to come to one of our board meetings is more than welcome, or who would like to become a member of one of the LLCs, like the Magical Bridge LLC. That would be great.
Thank you.
Okay, well, you're
Terrific.
welcome.
I have a question too.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You have the mic.
Okay.
Oh,
I
yes.
was going to ask, how do you coordinate the parks? Do you talk with Rob and Darren, or how do you, is this just an informal discussion, or is there more formal applications for doing work at parks?
Well, we work either with Greg or Mark. Those are really the key people that we work with. And we also are working now with Peter Jensen in Public Works.
And so you'll just have a discussion, you'll just ask him, what does he need done, and you'll have thoughts, and you just
Talk.
Yeah,
we talk with them. Peter's come to our meetings. Greg has come to some of our meetings. So we keep in touch with the city.
And Mark is one of the park supervisors out in the field, works for Darren.
And he's the one we work with when we actually do labor.
Okay.
We work with Mark. And sometimes we work with Greg too, but Mark is usually involved.
My question is, do you get requests from the public for funding particular projects? Do you get any sort of outside contact about that, or is it mostly self-generated, or from your work with the city that you figure out what's
Or it could be
on the
from
agenda?
people who are involved with a particular park. Like there's a native plant garden at Bull Park, and they have come to us, and they are seeking donations for their native plant garden, and they can make a contribution to Friends of the Palo Alto Parks for the Bull Park Fund. So that's an example of when somebody has come to us. But their interest was a particular park.
So you don't have an ongoing list of, this is our wish list for parks? The reason I ask is I wonder if there's not some benefit, if you did, to having some explicit conversations about that to try and work something into a CIP, or the other way around, as well as you all helping us. Are there ways that the city can help meet some of your priorities?
Yeah, well, we don't really have a wish list for parks. We just kind of have antennas out, and people find us if they have, or they're looking for help, or they have a need.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and your impact has been very visible citywide. It's been really great.
Oh, well, thank you. We enjoy it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next item of business is review the draft report, cost of services study that's been to the Finance Committee of Council and is proposed to go in November. And I think
It's Lam Do, a business manager for the department, our department, Community Services. Have you met Lam before,
Yep.
everyone?
Yep.
Probably seen him around. He's been with us for quite some time.
The two new commissioners.
Community Commissioner Lam Do. Come on, chat. Thank you.
And of course, we're privileged to have a member of the Finance Committee sitting at our table as our liaison, who has offered to also provide comments
Yes.
after you do about how it went across in the Finance Committee and so on.
Yes.
So Lam's been sort of the staff liaison from our department with the finance department on this study, and has some good history, and has been working with the finance staff through the process. So, and the report is just off the press, right? I mean, it went to finance committee, I think last week, was it?
Yes.
So, happy to bring it here. I know that it's been some time coming, but I thought it'd be great to have Lam here to talk a little bit about the report and the reason the report was done and so on. So,
Thank you, Rob. And good evening, Chair Lowing and fellow members of the Commission. Lam Do, Management Analyst for the Community Service Department. Wanted to discuss with you how this study came about, and I'll ask Councilmember Schmidt to fill in and provide more context as needed. This cost of services study was actually initiated by our Office of Management and Budget Division of Administrative Services. And it is actually not a community services cost of service study, but it's actually a citywide cost of services study, including services provided by Public Works, by police, by fire, animal services, community services, and eventually to also include fees for development center. What initiated this study were some state propositions that were passed by voters to ensure that taxes are not passed on to residents as fees, and it also to ensure that fees are not greater than the cost of a city to provide the services. Along with that, the city also needed to take a look at our fees and fee structures as sort of a review every few years, and the city had not done that in a number of years. So as a result, it was sort of for both to ensure that we were in compliance with the state propositions, and also to review and assess our fees. So the city then worked with MGT consultants to create a structure for the fee study, and also to provide sort of a conclusion and some recommendations. After looking at fiscal year 2012 actuals, costs, and revenue streams, the study came back with some recommendations of what fees should be, what cost recovery levels should be for the various program areas, ranging from police services to fire to animal services to planning, and also community services. Specifically for community services, the cost recovery level that was determined after both direct costs, overhead, and indirect costs was at, community services was at about a 30% cost recovery level. And in comparing to other cities as well, the recommendation was, there was no recommendation, to change our cost recovery level. However, in a discussion with Finance Committee, the Finance Committee accepted the report but was not ready to accept the recommendation. Our Finance Committee members expressed a desire to reach out to the community to find out what are the values and what are the desires of the community, and then later to apply that towards a discussion of what cost recovery levels should be in community services. So, the outcome of where and how staff will look at fees is still to be determined, pending the Finance Committee's recommendations back, and their decisions, working with their full council to reach out to the community for having a values and desires discussion. There are several approaches to addressing this. Cost recovery could be kept the same at the 30% level, but perhaps adjusting select fees upwards and other fees down. That is, if the desire were to keep the overall cost recovery level the same. There's still that option to, certain programs perhaps are deemed more valuable, and perhaps the city wants to make that part of the fabric of the community and subsidize it more, and then certain services may be deemed more personal, and perhaps ask staff to adjust the fees so that there are more, there's a higher level of cost recovery. Other options would be to assess how the costs of providing the service, are there changes in the way that we can deliver the service to reduce costs? So it may not necessarily be a change in fees that can impact cost recovery, but it could be also a change in the expenditures that the city incurs, whether it be staff time, materials costs, overhead costs, or even an allocation method. There was a discussion amongst Finance Committee members of how the city is currently allocating our overhead, whether it be attorney services, HR services, administrative services, and how that process is allocated, whether it be allocated based on head count, based on square footage. There's several different methods depending on the type of cost as of now, right now, in the study, one of the large overhead costs is maintenance of all of our facilities. And the methodology right now is based on square footage. Is that the appropriate method to do that? I mean, a theater being, for example, a large facility, as a result, because it's having large square footage, incurs a heavy percentage of the maintenance cost based on that allocation method, but it may not reflect an actual cost. So there's a lot to be discussed, allocation method, and also a determination of what are the values and desires of the community. However, the report that was brought to the Finance Committee by Administrative Services and the Office of Management and Budget did conclude that for staff to, and this is not community services staff, but this is through the Office of Management and Budget, to provide a structure of a citywide cost recovery policy that would include different levels of cost recovery, low, medium, and high, and with a definition of certain percentage being low, medium, and high. From there, and incorporating a discussion of community values would then, down the line, impact the fee structures and impact how community services has its own cost recovery policy, and whether that's a change to the community services cost recovery policy to fall in line with a citywide policy. But that's still down the line. We haven't reached that point yet. Right now, the next steps for staff is to bring back to Finance Committee a draft of a cost recovery policy that's going to apply citywide. So hopefully, I think I've summarized it, Councilman Schmidt. If I've sort of left out some key points, I would ask you to go ahead and please provide some more background as well.
Excellent job of setting the background. Finance Committee had a meeting last Tuesday, spent about an hour and a half discussing this. And the driving force was the state law that said you cannot use fees for taxes. So any time that you calculate the real cost of a fee and it's more than 100% of the actual cost, that has to be lowered to the actual cost. And if you go through some of the tables in the book, you can see, not in community services, but elsewhere, there's a number of fees above 100%. So the first job is to fill the state mandate and make sure that those fees are only charging what they should. It was good to see that the policy as presented is a flexible policy. It doesn't mandate any particular level, but gives categories and ranges within those categories. And I think one of the questions the Finance Committee has was, what are the criteria in there to make sure that we're treating each type of service the same? Just in general, a couple tables we spent a lot of time on. One is on your page 24, community services table. And I know the last two columns show the cost recovery in varying ways, but they range from 2% to 114% for items in community services. Now, it would be helpful to get some input on are there reasons behind charging one group 2% and another one 86% or something. So we spent a lot of time looking at that column. The other points that people spent a lot of time on was Appendix C, which talked about the cost recovery policy for community services. And especially, I think, the third and fourth pages where the criteria became fairly explicit. And it would be helpful to have any comments you might have on those pages. Do those make sense to you? And finally, on the next to last page, which is attachment D, there's a set of numbers gathered. And, how do you assess those numbers? Some of them are number of people in a program. Others might be attendees or people who get use of it. How do you balance out someone taking a class from someone getting the benefits of the class? And what the Finance Committee ended up doing was sending it back to staff, asking them to come back with a clarification of the policy. What are the policy guidelines that will drive decisions on that? And as pointed out, I think the request was, let's get some public input. So look forward to your comments tonight.
Right, and for, just for clarification, there currently is an existing cost recovery policy for classes within community services, and that is the attachment C, which Councilmember Schmidt just referred to. It is about 6 years old, and the Parks and Recreation Commission at the time did provide input in this, and eventually it was brought to full council for adoption. However, this time around, looking at cost of services citywide, there is a desire within OMB, Office of Management and Budget, to have a citywide policy, and then eventually revise the community services policy to be in line with the citywide policy. So that's just for clarification that which policy is which.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you.
So what is the plan, what do you go back to Council Finance Committee or Council with as your next deliverable?
Yeah, so the next step is actually not going to be coming from the Community Service Department, but it'll be ASD staff with their recommendation of a citywide policy, and that is going to likely be in the form of high, medium to low, with low cost recovery programs in the range of 0 to 30% recovery, medium to be in the range of 30 to 70, and then high cost recovery above 70. But the discussion that has to follow after that is which programs fall under which of the three tiers, if we would call them tiers. And then, but then it's also not a matter of arbitrarily placing a program in one of the three. It's also, they should be based on the community values and community desires, of which there is an initial list. However, that's not fully a full list because it was only developed for community services programs, and that's attachment C, which Councilman Schmidt just referred to, of community benefits versus personal benefits. And then there's the gray area in between. Of course, some programs are going to have characteristics that are highly personal, but then it's also benefiting the community. I mean, we can use aquatics programs. You know, there's water safety that could be desired in the community, but then it's also individuals learning how to swim themselves. So there's, you know, where do we place that type of a program? So our Administrative Services OMB division will come forward with that for review by Finance Committee. That'll be the next step.
Right, so is there a November deliverable to council or to the Finance
The
Committee?
November deliverable is to Finance Committee.
Okay, and between now and then, there's gonna be public outreach or after the next Finance Committee? Trying to get a feel of the timeline.
I think it should be undergoing now. The ultimate goal is to be able to use this for next year's budget, which has a municipal fee schedule, so that we have a plan, a program for determining those fees. So the ultimate goal is by March or so, this will be finalized.
The budget process for fiscal year 2015 will begin in January with early discussions between City Manager's Office and Administrative Services and departments. And then departments will make proposals roughly around the March timeframe. And then specifically for municipal fees, those proposals will likely come forward in the April timeframe for adoption or review, by City Council in June.
Okay, thanks for that. And then the structure of the public comment and input, how do you envision that happening?
Actually, I think how we envision is probably would be public outreach. However, I think that process is going to be driven by Council and Finance Committee. It's not going to be driven by staff.
Yeah?
What does that mean?
You're gonna hold a lot of community meetings, Councilmember?
You mean we're looking for direction still on this? or-
We are. The council expressed that they were holding a retreat, and I apologize, I don't recall the day of the retreat, but that was going to be to initiate receiving for the first process of determining what community values were.
Yes, that's next Monday.
Okay.
And I assume that the reference was to the next finance committee meeting. There would be opportunity for public comment, and then when it comes to the council, there will be opportunity for council. But I think something like the boards and commissions discussing the pieces that are relevant to them is obviously an essential part of that community discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really gonna be important to get the commission's point of view on this, because, you know, it could have some pretty significant implications as to what programs we can offer or not offer, and where fees are gonna be set for, you know, youth, teens, adults. So this, I think, is really just the beginning of the conversation, and you'll probably wanna discuss it.
That's why I want to get a feel of the timeline,
Yeah.
to know, when we can have input and how we should organize and structure our own input. It may not be 6 hours tonight, but we may need 6 hours total, I don't know.
Yeah, if I understand it, and Mom, correct me if I'm
Yes.
wrong, but that when you go back in November, or the finance committee hears it again in November, it's more about the structure of what the policy will look like, as opposed to, this type of program will be at this level, this type at another level. Or do I not have that?
That's correct, Rob. It has to do with a structure that can be applied citywide, not specifically to community services. And the discussion about community services programs will come after the values discussion. I don't think that there was a desire by the Finance Committee to make any assumptions of what the community desires are, so that it was that they did not want to look at the various 30, 40 programs in community services and place them in any type of category at this time.
So it makes sense to me that the values discussion is really important and helps drive what the policy looks like. What doesn't seem very clear yet, and we'll have to get clear on this, is how does that value discussion happen in the community? So it's got to be more than just a finance committee and council meeting, or these meetings. What do you think?
And also, one other thing that the ASD Administrative Service expresses, that if need be, the timeline doesn't have to coincide with the budget process for fiscal year 15. So there is the option to delineate fee structures from the budget process. And this is because the city's forecast for fiscal year 15 is that we're going to be in a fortunate position where we're not going to need an increase across the board in revenues to balance the budget. That's the current forecast. So if need be, we could delineate the process. And I think the Finance Committee was open to receptive to that. However, if the first option would be to include it in the fiscal year 15 budget.
So what's the best way to structure tonight's comments on community services?
Well, my thought it was just, there's a lot of information in the report. I'm sure commissioners have questions about the report or the variety of attachments, so we could start there, I think.
Okay. We could get into this for hours, so just want to caution folks that, bedtime is in about 4 hours, so let's open it up for questions.
So my first question, I guess,
Wait,
is,
you need a mic.
oh, sorry. I just thought if I talked loud. Oh, thank you. Ooh, two. So my first question, Rob, primarily, or confusion, maybe I'm a little confused, because I did read, I started glancing after an hour, I have to admit. But how are we supposed to be it's very difficult for me to look at this and say, what warrants golf getting 93%? I'm not exactly sure how to approach looking at the numbers. Do you know am I making myself clear? Because, first of all, how many golf users are there?
Also, you have to keep
So,
Well,
just to
I'm not
clarify,
exactly.
What are some means
No, I know
subsidized?
you
that's the.
understand the chart, right?
Right,
So
I
this means
totally-
we recover 93% of the cost.
I understand,
Okay.
but what they were just saying is, they have to, at some point, realign the recovery of the percentages into three categories, low, moderate, and high, and then justify those costs.
Sure.
So,
If I could,
so what I'm saying is, how am I supposed to look at this and approach this conversation based on what you just said? Maybe that's a little clearer.
I think, so absent of a reassessment, a recent reassessment of what the community values are, I think if we look back to what prior values the department looked at, and what prior values the Parks and Rec Commission looked at when the Community Services Department's cost recovery policy was initiated,
Okay.
the values were based around programs that had that were for youth and that were for public safety. So we formed our values and our cost recovery levels lower for programs that were for youth, lower for programs that were group courses, and the opposite, higher for. Yes.
It
So if you
does
if you
explain that, it does explain that. I forget what page.
C.
yeah 3C. So if you take a look here, I'm not sure what page it is on your value, but we divided ours into three groups, group 1, 2 through 4, and there were community benefits, there were majority community benefits, and then there was going all the way to majority personal benefit. And then we also determined that we wanted to provide youth development, we wanted to provide safety, we wanted to provide health, we wanted to provide programs that provided life skills. So those were programs that we wanted to subsidize more. If there were programs that had to do with individual gain, whether it be something such as a retirement course or a private tennis lesson, we said, okay, that's going to be a program that we're not going to subsidize as much, and so we want to set our fees to have a higher cost recovery level. So
Okay.
it was a spectrum where youth programs and development programs were subsidized, individual programs were not. And so that's kind of, we didn't set a percentage at that time. So thinking of it as a range and a
Okay.
spectrum would be probably better than thinking of it as a cost recovery percentage. It's particular golf. Golf is a little bit different. Golf is not covered by these state mandates, so we're able to assess fees according to market, even if they are beyond our cost to provide the service. So looking at golf is probably not a good example of applying the state mandates. So.
Yeah, Commissioner Hadley?
Okay, so I think it sounds to me like there are two levels of values considerations going on. There's the first, looking at values and desires regarding the overall policy, where to cut off low, medium, high, and then there's a whole nother values desires discussion to have about where programs are placed within that range, assuming you end up with a range. So it seems to me that what this addresses is the first, which is how we should divide the low, medium, and high. And my first reaction was I wanted to commend the Community Service Department for getting out ahead of the game, because your policy for low, medium, high is very similar to what's been proposed in this study, and it's almost 10 years old. And I think it's a reflection of your thoughtful consideration of the issue. Especially regarding the balance of community benefits versus private benefits, which seems to be at the core of this recommendation. I think the recommendations are very, very general, as they obviously have to be for a citywide policy. I think once you get to the next level of what programs go where, we need a lot more data to have an effective means to prioritize a fee schedule. So I have, for example, we want to maintain affordability of services for low-income residents, but there's no data here about the uptake or demand for services by that population, or in which program areas demand predominates. So council can't judge yet where fee changes will serve that policy consideration. So there are a lot of that kind of data that I think is still necessary to be able to inform those decisions. I have a bunch of questions, so maybe I'll just start going through them. And they're mostly data related. So first of all, on the study as a whole, there's a quote in the beginning that says, Palo Alto provides a much wider array of services to its community than are found in other cities. Consequently, a significant number of non-residents participate. But there's nothing in the report that, there's no data to support those statements. So where does that come from?
Yeah, if you take a look, I think the third from the end, it's attachment D. There is a utilization and participation data. And what we have is, when you look at the top third, enrollments in classes and camps, the resident percentage is 89% and non-residents is 11%. So I think hopefully that answers your kind of
That
question.
shows how
where the
many,
demand is.
what the percentage of non-residents are that participates, but it doesn't tell us anything about what we're offering that's not offered elsewhere that's unique or special,
That's correct.
or anything about the age, income level, residency breakdown by that kind of categorization.
Yes, that's correct.
So I think that kind of thing would be useful to have if we're concerned about attracting a lot of non-residents to highly subsidized services, if that makes any sense. Another thing that the report mentions is that 17.9 million of the 19.6 million general fund subsidy represents historically subsidized programs within community services. So we've been highly subsidizing a lot of programs for a long time, and it's largely been the same array.
Yes.
Is that right? So my question there is, has any evaluation been done along the way to justify or affirm that historical subsidization, or are we just continuing to do it because we've always done it that way? I think this is an opportunity to look more closely at whether that makes sense, and that's part of the values and program placement discussion. On the summary chart, I'm cruising along here, don't worry. On the summary chart, which is page 24, I had a lot of questions about here. The first one is that Cubberley stands out as a $2.4 million expense with no fee revenue. Is that distorted because the revenue is pulled out by programs and put in other categories up above? Is that just the cost of maintaining rental facilities?
So Cubberley is a little bit unique in that the community services, along with Public Works, maintains the facility. However, the revenue stream from Cubberley programs, rentals as such, and leases do not get recognized in the city's operating fund. Rather, it's recognized in the UUT fund, which is the Utility Users Tax Fund, and it's intended to be a part of the contribution towards the covenant not to develop, which is funds the city's lease of Cubberley towards the school district.
So the UUT funds the subsidies that pay for the maintenance of the rental facilities. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. The department's operating budget funds the cost to maintain the facility, and the reason you see zero revenue is because the revenue is not recognized in the department's operating budget. It's recognized in the UUT fund, and that revenue is then used to pay for the Cubberley lease as part of the covenant not to develop.
So the money to pay that $2.4 million is not coming out of the CSD budget per se, because it's paid out of the UUT?
No, the expenses to operate the Cumberland Community Center does come out of the community services budget. The revenue that the center generates.
Doesn't get credited to the community
That's
services.
correct.
Okay,
It gets put
it
in a
goes
separate
back to the
fund, but
UUT.
You bring
I
up a
get
good point though, and we'll have to look at this one, because this number seems incorrect to me, the revenue, because there's two sets of revenue. There's lease revenue, like from Foothill College, and which is significant. It's over $1 million for all the leasehold.
Right.
And then there's hourly rental revenue, which is this $840,000. So I don't think this reflects the lease revenue, which should be in the total revenues. Yeah. No, we're gonna have to check on that data point.
The other piece of that question is these facilities are provided, not the hourly rent, well, I guess the hourly rentals also, the rentals and the leases are all below market rate for payment, for cost of space like that. So we're subsidizing every organization that operates out of Cubberley and provides a service to the community. It seems to me that the city ought to get credit for making those services available in the public view. I think Cubberley, one of the tricky things about Cubberley is people are really confused about what we're getting for all the money that we spend there. And part of the problem is that they don't understand that when you take your kid to tutoring at Cubberley, even though that's not a city program that you sign up through Enjoy, it's a program that the city provides through their space subsidy. And I think that has to be captured somehow in this fee discussion.
I think what you're referring to are associations and nonprofits that the city partners with to provide deliver services, sort of an alternative service delivery model. We may not be able to fund a child care program directly, but we will provide a lower lease for the organizations.
Exactly.
I think that's what you're referring to. Okay.
That's
thank you.
exactly right. And my concern is that the way this is presented in this
Is the
chart
dollars
with
and
the zero,
cents.
with the dollars and cents and the zero revenue and not breaking out into having Cubberley stand all by itself, even though many of this kind of services up above are provided there. I wish there is some way to present it in a different way that gives.
Right, so what's lost in an analysis of data is, right, the alternative services and how we deliver those services. Yes, okay.
And it's at a cost to us. It's not
Yes.
free. What are typical sources of other revenue? There's this other revenue category where there's very large variation from one program area to the next. So I wonder if that suggests any opportunities for the city to stimulate support for underfunded categories, so to speak, in this other revenue column. And is that still on the chart? It's total other revenue.
Right.
And I know that may not come up as part of the fee setting process, but this highlights it, so it might be a next step later to figure out how to tap into those. Children's theater stands out quite a bit here, as it always does. I think it's very hard to justify such a low direct cost recovery as compared to other youth programming. And I think if the city decides to continue along that historical path, we need to come up with a better story for why we're doing it, because that's really missing. On the community services policy, attachment C, does the policy consider resident versus non-resident? It didn't seem to be represented in these policy guidelines.
The policy does not address resident versus non-resident directly. However, that is addressed in the fee structure of the community services department. Residents pay a discount and non-residents pay a premium, so depending on how you view which side of the coin you're on. But there is a difference in the fees that are paid by resident versus non-resident. In addition to that, residents have priority registration as well. So that is where we ensure that our residents have a lower fee and have first opportunity.
And why is that not included as part of the policy?
The
Is that
the
just-
policy was addressing overall cost recovery levels. It wasn't to segment what should be a resident cost recovery level or what should be a non-resident cost recovery level.
So it's in that cloud between the policy and the fee structure.
Yes, and at the time that the department's cost recovery policy was established, we already had, and it was taken into account, knowing that the department charges two different pricing, has a pricing structure of both resident and non-resident.
Okay. I wonder if that's not worth fleshing out some more what you mean by how much you want to target residents versus non-residents, because once you get into fee decisions by program, then you have to consider how much more you're going to charge a non-resident than a resident, and if that's going to change under different categories of groupings of cost recovery groups. right?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that question. It's an interesting question because there is sort of a policy decision about non-resident fees being 15%. There's a 15% difference. And that's in the municipal fee schedule. And it is part of the sort of fee-setting spreadsheet that staff use to set fees that accompanies the policy, right? But it's not called out here, which it seems like it ought to be.
It seems like you're implementing that policy.
Yeah.
Right.
It is
Might as well
part of
state that
policy.
it's a policy.
Right.
But is that within the proper confine, does that fall within Proposition 26, I think? Does
Yeah.
that still fall within the allowed,
Still has to be
level.
lower than the cost of providing the service.
like, so, but does it cost 15% more to process a non-resident through,
Oh, no,
so there's the differential.
yeah. They just pay a little more toward the cost of.
But they're still paying less than the cost of the service.
Right.
100%.
So they don't have to
Right.
be treated equally.
Right.
What it ends up being is they're being subsidized less than a resident would be subsidized. So
That's a good way to.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Okay.
I have a big picture question about Proposition 26. And then you said some things are
But
exempt.
she's not done.
I'm sorry.
You can go ahead.
But some of these questions, I think,
I'll hold the space.
Yeah.
Keep the pen there.
is that rental property, if you're renting out Lucy Stern, that doesn't count. That's driven by market prices, right? There's
Yes,
the
that
thing
is
in there, I remember
correct.
reading that. And golf course fees can be anything you want.
correct,
That's also market-based.
correct.
Okay, so from community services, those are the two places where we might make money. Other things like camps or yoga classes, we're losing money on that.
We're subsidizing.
We're subsidizing, yeah. And so in that case, the Prop 26 is kind of relevant for our purposes.
Right.
Is that correct?
For the CSD
For-
questions about
For community services.
classes.
For community services, anything that we make money on, which would be rentals or golf course, are exempt by the Prop 26 limit. So
That-
this percentage of recovery is good for our own policy decisions, but we're not obliged to keep it below 100.
For those two categories, use of property, which is the facility rentals, and the golf course.
We still have to keep it under 100.
For the others.
the
For
other
the
things,
classes
but-
and
But
stuff.
we subsidize everything else in that category, right?
Right, we don't ever go over 100 anyway, because.
So it's kind of a moot point, the fact, even if Proposition 26 didn't exist, we'd be having the exact same discussions and have exact same trade-offs. It's not
That's,
changing,
you're correct.
Right.
for community services, it's not changing any of our decisions.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right. That's all right. I had a long list. Okay, parameter 2 of the cost recovery, parameter 2, where that, I'm not sure where I found that, but I think it was in the cost recovery policy for the CSD. Says cost recovery for children's programs will be less than adult programs. But then when we look at this summary chart, it didn't play out that way at all, with few exceptions. Why is that? And, yeah, why is that?
I think it didn't for older adults either.
Right.
That's correct. What we end up, in the development of the initial policy going back about, 7, 8 years ago, when we developed it, we didn't do a full-scale citywide impact of the fees. We did it sort of in-house. We did look at our direct costs. We did look at indirect costs of departments such as services from HR or ASD. However, in the most recent study, it was sort of seeing let's apply every single fee that we can think of, and as a result, it drove up the cost, the indirect overhead costs. So what happens now is, back then we recommended a 35% above direct cost to cover your overhead. This approach now says, okay, well, is 35% enough to cover your overhead? So as a result, what you're seeing now is that it's not. The overhead in the programs for adults, where you see it as less cost recovery when it should be the opposite, is a result of the volume that we bring in regards to participation. So when we don't have as many participants in the adult programs, it's still charged the overhead. So it doesn't average the average cost out. In the youth programs where we have a lot of participation and the same overhead costs, it averages out the cost. As a result, it brings up the cost recovery level.
So that's a significant
Rob to-
impact that's,
Yeah, uh-huh.
that's gonna be true across all your programs, and is gonna be affected by any new citywide policy that sets guidelines for low, medium, and high, right?
Yes,
You're looking at all the overhead that way.
that's correct. So it is something that we, as we look at the most recent data, we are seeing that there are discrepancies that don't follow in line with the intent of the community services cost recovery policy to subsidize youth programs more than adult programs. But and we're seeing as we apply all possible fees, and we have lower participation in adult programs, as a result, it skews the numbers. And it's not skewing it artificially, it's skewing it structurally. I think that's what
But
it
it's
is.
significant.
Yes.
So if you wanna retain that priority to have lower cost recovery for children's programs, then you have to make radical changes in fees.
That's correct.
And that's where it gets a little tricky, right? Because we have to be real about how this plays out in the public. In other words, there's a willingness to pay for programs, particularly for youth programs and swim lessons and that type of thing, which might fall in the, you don't have to recover as many costs because it's a community benefit, but there's a real willingness to pay for the service. So what's the appropriate thing to do there? And that's we sort of struggle with.
Table necessarily.
Right, it's,
Especially in the marketplace where these programs tend to be pretty expensive,
yeah,
so you don't want to be way below.
right. So, I don't have an answer to it, but that is a challenge, because there is a sort of an overall interest in cost recovery for community services. We don't, 30%, right, is where we're at, and so.
And in many ways, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm asking another big picture question. These indirect expenses, someone referenced that a lot of that has to do with real estate, for example, for maintenance. But I know that we've been through this before, and there's also an allocation for total staffing as a percentage of total. So when we had golf course maintenance workers on the payroll, that was a higher indirect allocation burden that came to CSD, and when we went to contract, we're spending a little bit less money overall, but that indirect expense went down. So the global question is kind of like in a spreadsheet. If indirect is all off, then maybe we should be starting there.
Well,
What's the policy on that?
The indirect costs actually didn't go down because the cost was still incurred, and so it had to be spread elsewhere when we did it via an FTE allocation. So with
It went down in CSD, I think.
yes, because CSD went down in headcount.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So that was artificial one way or the other. Just because we went to contract FTEs versus on the payroll FTEs, all of a sudden, the net amount of expenses for CSD went down, which means that their cost recovery went up just by working the spreadsheet, and they didn't change any fees or anything. So I'm just saying, have we given the appropriate amount of attention to how to do the indirect? I mean, I know you have to live with this all the time, so I know you have. I'm saying at a policy level, including council.
Yes, so different jurisdictions allocate overhead costs, and this, what you're referring to is cost plan charges differently. Some do it based on FTE, some do it based on program, down to the program specific. So our finance committee did ask that staff come back in November as well to with a update on how the city is now allocating our overhead costs, because the methodologies for the various costs have changed over time.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you.
I have 3 more questions, then I'll let somebody else talk. I'm sorry to take so long. On the attachment D with the user data, why are we missing so much residency data? It seems like we should know the numbers for the children's theater show participants, for the music and dance enrollments, the rec class enrollments, the dance, aquatics, tennis, etc. It feels fishy to me that we have those gaps, and I think it will feel fishy to the public as well.
We, what you have in attachment D is data that is culled from our SEA report primarily, which is our service efforts and accomplishments report, which is published by our auditors department, rather than placing figures that are provided by staff tallies. So what we've done is these are more system numbers that we know that we have hard figures. So let's use your example, why don't we have figures for show participation in children's theater? We do have that. We can provide that by asking staff. However, it wasn't tracked systematically. So it's not something that we could really feel comfortable saying, this is a hard number that we're strongly.
I'm not talking about the overall number of participants. I'm talking about the resident versus non-resident breakdown. And when you register, you register as a resident or a non-resident. So can't you just select that field in the database and get your numbers?
We can, for some, for example, like the music and dance that you asked for, but it takes a little bit more culling of the data, and we didn't cull it for this. We culled sort of roll-up figures instead, but we could cull it in that way. Some we can't, though. So going back to, for example, children's theater participating in show productions, that's not a non-registration process. That's sort of you audition and you then get selected. There is no official enrollment, so it's not a hard number that we have. So.
But I think it would be worth the effort, probably, to cull some more of that data, because I think you really want to avoid the appearance of some kind of secret agenda to protect some programs over other programs. So I encourage you to get as much data out there, even if you have to include descriptive caveats of these aren't precise because we don't know this, or this is just anecdotal. Even for field use, we don't know about how many residents are on the field at any given time, but we know the percentage of residents represented on each group we broker to. That's something that we can put on here and people can understand that's a limited function data, but it's at least something that we do know and the public doesn't. Rental rates. What do we know about bookings at these rates? Do we have a lot of vacancy? Are we booking them fully all the time?
Well, it depends, which center we're looking at. I know that the Lucy Stern Community Center, is very, very popular during weekend rentals and evening rentals, but is it booked, all day long? No. During the day, there's openings. So it's, it's different from center to center.
rental rates for evenings as opposed to during the day?
I don't believe so. No, not.
There are, it's not.
No.
Seems like
There are different rental rates per facility, the Carmelite Community Center versus Lucy Stern and the new Mitchell Park.
it seems like if you're trying to maximize your revenue, you'd want to give a discount for the open times and charge more for the popular times.
It's not something we do currently.
Well, I'd suggest you do that as part of this fee analysis, figure out what's the best way to go, because it's also impossible to compare. We have all these other neighboring town prices, but we don't know what their uptake is either. So we have no way to, the numbers are meaningless unless we know whether people are using the space at that rate or not. So I would love to have more data there. And finally, the golf course, that resident, non-resident distinction is most glaring there, of course, because we have
I think 12% resident.
12% resident, 88% non-resident, which is a pretty big deal. And I know those are regular, reliable users, and we don't want to chase them away, but I wonder if we couldn't increase our resident uptake of that service, especially in light of the new golf course, by having some kind of maybe phased-in super resident discount to get them out there to see what a great course it is, and then understanding that in year 2 the rates are going to go up to this, in year 3 the rates are going to go up to that. But I think that's the kind of thing you can do when you're looking comprehensively at fees to try and influence behavior. And I have some final comments, but I'll wait on that.
Other questions, big picture or otherwise?
It's in attachment D, page 1 of 2, at the bottom of the chart, looks like this.
It's third from the last page.
Other comments or questions of,
Yeah. The first question I wanted to ask is the field rental use, is that in the parks line item on page 24? Or if not, where is that?
It's in the recreation facilities, I believe.
That's correct.
It's under facilities, oh. Okay.
Yes. The reason why it's in under recreation facilities is because recreation facilitates the brokering process of the fields.
Okay, I guess I was wondering what, then I can't really ask the same question if it's there, because I thought it was under parks. Yeah, that question doesn't apply. I wanted to know about what percentage of those fees were from field rentals, but if it's under recreation facilities, it's harder to know how that relates, because it's compared to physical facilities as well as the outdoor fields. I guess I was hoping for some clarity on that, because when we were discussing the field use policy, and hearing from a bunch of constituents about how the fields were brokered, one of the conversations I ended up having was with one of the folks from the Menlo Park soccer community, who said that since our fees are cheaper, even though they live in Menlo Park, they prefer to use ours. So I was wondering how that played out in the comparison.
I think we took a look at some comparison fees, and we set our fees. I hesitate to answer, not exactly.
Fees for field use really differ significantly from city to city. It's odd. It's not like there's a market rate. It's really, yeah, on the range. Yeah. So I can tell you that if you look at the recreation facilities,
Mhm.
you see a revenue amount of $431,000.
Mm-hmm.
Approximately $300,000 is from field rentals,
Oh, it is.
which doesn't obviously come anywhere near the cost of the maintenance of those fields and parks, but yeah. And the other portions of that revenue come from Lucy Stone rental fees and picnic rental fees and tennis court rental fees.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's gonna go up significantly when Mitchell Park comes on board, which will generate another 100 to 150,000 rental fees.
Okay, so that, I'm sorry, was that, were our fees for fields compared to Menlo Park, or was that not one of the things that
Well,
you pulled out?
based on looking at fees, our fees are set for supporting our youth programs, where
Right.
so that's why our fees are lower in that type of category in regards to the youth. But when you look at the fees for non-youth, our fees are actually, based on a non-scientific survey, are actually higher than Menlo Park. So I
Okay,
can't.
so it might have been
Maybe specific, yeah, right, maybe certain fields are, but in general, if for adult programs, we start at $46 and we go as high as $216 an hour, depending on the type of field and amenities. Menlo Park starts at $22 and goes up to $100 an hour. So their highest fee is $100 an hour. Ours is as high as $216 an hour. So,
so it depends on, like you're saying, which fields and
correct.
which type of team is using it. Okay, thank you for that clarification. The other kind of slightly higher level question was, so you mentioned that youth and public safety were prioritized for the higher subsidy or the lower cost recovery, right?
yes.
And so adults are not youth, but where do seniors fall in? Do seniors fall into the high, medium, or low bracket?
Seniors, at the time the community services policy was established, fell under the, lack of a better word, the at-risk population, which is also, and I'm sorry, and we deemed that as a population that we did want to subsidize. We just, as a department, however, we don't have a budget to have a robust program for seniors. Years ago, the cities made a decision to fund Avenidas to provide senior services indirectly as opposed to directly providing the service. So.
Okay, so the seniors did fall under, if they fell under at-risk, they would fall under the lower cost recovery, similar to youth and to public safety?
That's correct.
Okay, great. And what about people with disabilities? If they do, are they called out individually, or are they, it's either the youth and the seniors are already, so if you're an adult with disabilities, you're in the same category, you're in the high cost recovery, or is that not
No,
called out?
you're in the lower cost recovery as well.
That's in there as well?
Yes.
Okay, is that in the report?
We don't have programs specifically for the disabled, but what we have is called a therapeutics program, and it's for adults with it's to provide life skills for adults to be more independent, and that's the approach that we have instead. So it's not that we're catering them because of they're disabled, but it's because we want them to be more independent, and the therapeutics program is also one that is subsidized.
Okay, great, thank you. So one is a follow on something that Commissioner Hedlerly asked you earlier, and I'm not clear on the answer. So the discrepancy where under visual arts and under music and dance, for example, both of those, the youth, it's out of whack. It's the opposite of what we would expect it, our goal is. It should be lower cost recovery for the youth programs and higher for the adults, but in both of those examples, it's higher. I wasn't clear on what the next, does that mean we aim to adjust that, or that's what I wasn't clear on.
I think what we need to do is we need to first assess how we allocate our overhead costs. And based on the current methodology, it is providing the results that you see here. And it's a discussion, is that the appropriate way to allocate costs? And if we do allocate that, then the next, what brings up what Rob was saying is, then the discussion is, but then there is capacity to charge more for youth programs, and do we want to then say, because we're supposed to subsidize youth programs more, we're not going to charge as much as we can? We don't want to leave money on the table either, so it could be that maybe we need to rethink how we phrase that we want to subsidize youth programs versus adult programs.
Yeah, and to your point earlier, we do a lot more youth programs, so we have a lot more participation, so we spread the cost of a coordinator across a lot more people, and so then you have a greater cost recovery level for youth than adults.
Right. Yeah, so the volume of participation is what I think Rob is referring to. So
Thank you.
it doesn't average out the cost when it's low participation in the adult programs.
Keith, did you have other? Oh, sorry.
This is just a general comment in that we're seeing the cost recovery, and that tells us whether we should be charging more or less, but also the thing that's not listed here is information on the market. And what is the JCC charging for similar services, or the YMCA or Mountain View? You have the nice table in the back page there talking about the rental costs if I want to rent a room somewhere.
Right.
But I'd like to see the same thing for the purposes of the classes and other recreation. I think that would help us also decide, are we undercharging? And if we're undercharging, especially for things for summer camp, when I do the summer camps through Palo Alto, they're much cheaper than anything I can get in the private sector. And there is a market for summer camps. These working parents want to pay, and they're more than willing to pay if you have a quality camp. So I think we may be leaving money on the table there that could help us subsidize other programs that maybe the market isn't there's not as much demand for, but we think there's still value for.
I see your point. I think that, you know, that discussion has come across, is that right? Are we in the right business? Which program should we be in? Who we should be competing with? Or should we be competing with the private sector, or should we be competing with the public and nonprofit sector? And I think the reality is that we are competing with all, whether it be a private science camp or a science camp by the JCC or the Y. I think we compete against all of them. And we do have to look at the figures and determine eventually, you know, if we are not able to do it at the right cost recovery level that we deem we want to subsidize or not subsidize, then the next question would be, should we still be in that business? So is that the position for us to be in? Or should we take our resources and apply it elsewhere where we can be
you're
more
saying
successful?
If the market is providing a service, then why should we provide it?
That will come into the discussion as well.
Yeah, but it also would be possible to get a comparison of recreation, because right now I don't know how we compare on the various classes to the private sector.
Yes, we can get that.
And the other thing is when you talk about the costs, let's say I have an aerobics class, you have the direct cost of paying for the aerobics instructor, but then you have indirect costs of the maintenance. Does that include the room rental? You know, if you were trying to start your own business and give aerobics lessons, you'd have to rent that room, whether it be in a public or private facility, and pay for that rental. It means that the owner of the building is being reimbursed not only just for his maintenance, but also for his land. How do we book that fact that we're using facilities that are owned by the city?
I think that's built into the overhead, isn't it? The 35% or whatever.
In the current policy adopted, this is the one that was adopted a number of years ago, right? We built in an overhead cost above direct costs, as opposed to assigning a certain dollar or certain per hour rate. We built it as a percentage, and the purpose of that was to create simplicity for staff to interpret, as opposed to having staff have, in this scenario, I need to add X amount of dollars to my overhead. In this scenario, I need to add X amount of dollars. So we made it simple where.
But how do you calculate that? What goes in? Is that just maintenance, or is it actually the fact that the city has assets and those assets are worth money?
At the time, it was maintenance and not asset perspective.
In that sense, you're underbooking the costs, and if there's Proposition 26 issues, if you're underbooking your costs, it may look like you have to cut prices when you don't necessarily have to cut prices.
We're not in that situation.
Yeah, not in
Yeah.
community services, but just in
Correct.
general. Although there are some here that we're close. Some of the recreation youth were near 100%. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
On this last table, then the youth, when you take the full cost recovery, is 99%. But yet, if you're getting effectively free rentals from the city,
No,
or
that's a good point. That's not included in the cost here,
Yeah.
on that line item.
yeah, and
So-
if someone can rent a room and just pay for the maintenance, that's a pretty good deal. And if you're constrained by Proposition 26 to keep that number, which is now 99, below 100, you're not really doing the accounting correctly. Let's see. Yeah, same vacancies, I think would be also a very good information if you're trying to say, what's the market telling us about our pricing? I think that would be good information. On page 9, it just says, it is likely the city's practice of adjusting fees annually via CPA factor did not keep pace with actual government services. Over the past decade, government sector costs have outpaced general inflation. Why is that? Do we know why that?
Healthcare primarily.
Okay. You can go ahead,
Okay,
Deirdre.
thanks. Just to follow up on Keith's question about the summer camps, are they, like when I see JMZ Sciences on the second line, does that include all the science summer camps?
That's science education, which are the summer camps and the year-round classes.
Okay, because I do agree that there's a different market for summer camp versus year-round. And I think that one thing Palo Alto should take great pride in is the quality of their summer camps. And I think we compete extremely well with other venues, and that there's a very loyal following of parents in the city, such that there's sort of this oral tradition of new people to town hear about the quality of our summer camps. And a lot of that has to do with the kind of staffing that we do of the summer camps. So having been a user of a variety of summer camps, other venues don't have the depth of the staff that we have, as far as also college graduates. So that in a lot of summer camps are highly weighted toward high school volunteers, which is beautiful, except they're missing some of the top structure and mentorship of those younger kids. And so I think we offer something unique in this city. And so I just think it has to be handled well, so we don't lose that loyal following. I think people are willing to pay because people have the perception and the experience that it's very high quality. So I'm just trying to say that's what I believe that's what we should be doing, and we should continue to provide that kind of high quality summer experience. I think we do it well.
On behalf of our science staff, thank you for that, those kind words, and I'll pass it on to them. We do have the ability to charge more for our summer camps, as opposed to our classes. You are correct in that. And the current fee structure also permits that. Our fee structure is a range where it doesn't call out specifically science programs versus summer science programs versus year-round education, science education, or science outreach. The fees are set in a category where it's a range, because some camps or classes can be just a week, some can be 2 weeks. So there is room in the fee structure to do that. And I think I'm fairly certain that is acknowledged by our staff that programs the science camps, and they have raised fees in the past 3 or 4 years, multiple times, not just necessarily because of the CPI, but still falling in line with the fee schedule. So.
Right. Good. And we have a really good mentoring program with the developmental assets for youth. So those summer camps provide a variety of services. They serve our youth through counselor and training programs. They serve families. They're of extremely high quality, so I just can't say enough about them. And again, I'm not saying how to charge or how not to charge, but I'm just saying as far as value, it's very high value, and it's unique, I think. So if someone's taking a clay class, where does that fall here? An art class working with clay?
Clay, yes.
That's under visual arts? Okay. Okay, so I think as far as the policy in attachment D, I think it's kind of confusing to have those 4 groups, those 4 bullet points at the top of, is this attachment D? Characteristics of community benefit?
Attachment C.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, C. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, it's far into attachment C, maybe the last page of it. Yeah, the last page of attachment C. I just wanted to talk about this a little bit. I can follow, so you have in your table, you've listed it for group 1 and group 4, is that correct? The table below?
The table below are the characteristics, and those are the 2 extremes on the spectrum.
Group 1 and group 4?
Right, would be group 1 and group 4. And then in between there's a group 2 and a group 3 as well, which would blend the 2 columns in that table.
I think, so I guess you could have given that to us if you wanted to. It just seems like it's splitting hairs possibly to try to divide that. Do you find that?
Yeah, you're correct. It would be splitting hairs because it's, there's always the subjective side of it, whether one is, it's strictly one profile versus the another profile, when the reality is there's probably, I think council member Bert said exactly that there's tweeners, and we should recognize that there's tweeners.
So where are we going? I know the city wants to do this high, medium, low. Let me make sure I understand this right. So you've divided these groups in the policy because you're expecting there will be different cost recovery for these various groups. So do these groups track with a high, medium, and low cost recovery, or do I have that mixed up?
So if you look at the previous page to that table, the way the community services broke it out, instead of a high, medium, low, we broke it out into 4, which would be a group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4, with different cost recovery levels for each. So I think if the city council adopts a high, medium, and low, then the next step for community services would be to revise our group 1, 2, 3, and 4 into 3 groups instead of 4 groups.
Okay, yeah, that seems, I would just off the cuff be in support of that, because the 4 groups just seems I understand the symmetry and why you came up with 4, because they have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Just seems like it, should you show us a table, it'd be very interesting to see how you've done that.
Yes.
And I assume it's very, very complicated and quite subjective. I thought fitness for adults falling under the personal benefit characteristics, that's the one that sort of jumped out at me. If you look in your table for group 4, personal benefit characteristics, I'm still on the last page of attachment C. The one that sort of clearly social networking context for personal gain, that one seems somewhat clear. You know, some are really easy, but fitness for adults, I thought that was not so clear cut because we have that as a community benefit.
Yes.
And value.
So I think this is a change in time. We developed this list, although the policy was adopted, I think 6 or 7 years ago. The list initiated probably going back even 8 or 9 years ago. So I think, health has come to the forefront more than it was 8, 9 years ago. And so as a result, if we were to redo this list today, you're absolutely correct. I think the fitness for adults would probably be just as important as fitness for youth or any population. So.
Right, because I guess the way I would look at this is making sure that we offer something to each segment of the population. So we offer some subsidization to our seniors. We offer some to our youth. I just feel like we have to split the pie within these age groups and make sure that everyone's getting a piece of the pie. And so to me it seems like a meta level would be like how much subsidization do we want to allocate by age within our population? And then once you kind of at a policy the policy decision will be, will you do that? And if we decide to do that, then once you work within a single age category, you can have a lot of flexibility. We already know that summer camps for youth are money makers, and so why would we not want to do that? But that doesn't mean the youth aren't going to get something. And so then that allows you to look at the other things on the list and parse it out in that direction. So I don't think you want some global statement that youth, it's already fallen apart, basically, this global statement that somehow youth are going to get higher subsidies than adults. We've seen it's fallen apart in here for good reason. So it wasn't a great premise, probably, to do it that way. So there has to be some back and forth between what's policy and practicality. So I guess I'm advocating for that.
Good questions and good point. I mean, it's really intended to be, it was a guide, and we program by program, we look at it. So youth generally, right, if you look at the classes, the special interest classes, pretty high cost recovery. But then if you look at other youth programs, like some of our teen programs and our teen center, when we open that, you'll see that is going to be very low cost recovery, and it will remain that.
Right, and I would add into that. So I'm a strong proponent of counselor and training programs within the city. I think they are beautiful for mentoring and keeping our youth health, and they're well done with the developmental assets. Not everyone does that. A lot of the summer camp programs do not mentor as well as City of Palo Alto. And you could actually, that would be one thing as you're comparing your competition. I would look at that index as how well are those programs mentoring those youth? Are they just exploiting them? Or are they mentoring them, exploiting them for cheap wages? And so what I would say is that if we put a value on mentoring our youth for their development, that would be a place where you would then, by definition, not have as much cost recovery and maybe expand some of those programs. Because sometimes just to mentor youth, you actually have to go out and hire more staff, which costs money. So in what you're doing through that is because you're investing in the youth, because I know for a fact that one year when I was on the commission, City of Palo Alto could only hire 1 or 2 15-year-olds out of the CIT program. So there's different levels of mentoring. There's doing it where the youth are not getting paid. We have mentoring programs where our youth pay to be in the mentoring program, and I think that's great. By all means, there's some good utility for that, to have the parents value getting their youth mentored. By all means, have the parents pay into it to help. But there's some areas where we're really short, and that's with giving those youth some jobs. When they come out, how can we create? So I'd throw in there, so mentoring youth and creating jobs for youth. I would throw that in as something that might have value within our community, and we might have to pay for that job creation, but it might be, and that's also personal gain for that youth because they're making a salary. So it's complicated, but it's probably worth looking at. I think those were really, I had one more, a source of confusion. When you list community theater as a line item, can you explain what that entails?
Yes, the city operates a community theater through a partnership with three professional theater groups, that being West Bay Opera, Palo Alto Players, and Theater Works. So we provide the facility to those theater groups at a very minimal cost. We pick up the cost to operate the theater. We pick up the cost to manage the theater. And the theater groups provide a ticket surcharge that brings back a minimal amount of revenue back to the city.
So that's why it just struck me that this subsidization, the cost recovery is at 3% for that. It's not a huge line item cost like with the children's theater. When you have a huge line item cost and then a very low cost recovery, it really stands out, as Commissioner Hetterly cited earlier.
So
for community theater, I just was a little bit confused why we don't have better cost recovery on that.
This is a larger discussion than I think that at this table. The city, I don't know whether it's going back 20, 30 years, I'm not sure how many years, but previously operated community theater with city staff. Then it was spun off through the partnership of the three theater groups. It was spun off initially with the partnership with Palo Alto Players, where Palo Alto Players absorbed city staff and produced show productions for the community. Eventually, this partnership, we also brought on West Bay Opera and Theater Works. So the history behind community theater is that it was formerly a city program that was spun off, and so as a result, it's the city's contribution towards theater programs for adults. If you look at the cost specifically, you'll see that the direct expense is $29,000, but the indirect expense is $522,000. And this goes back to the square footage discussion earlier. Because it's such a large facility, it incurs a large share of the cost to maintain community services facilities as a whole, because it's based on square footage.
So do you think that inflates it inappropriately? Because if that were not inflated, the cost recovery would look better. So can we control for that as we're looking at this table?
Well, if we control for it, I think the discussion should be how do we control for across the board, and not necessarily how do we control it for one specific program. We need a methodology that applies across the board, and acknowledging that there will be outliers in any methodology, and so.
Yeah, and whereas the children's theater also has that total direct expense, because I assume for staff that have to run those programs. So community theater, I think you pointed out, you made a really good point how lopsided. So whenever we see an indirect and a direct cost so lopsided like that, it might be that we're being a bit misled by a confounding factor in terms of how the numbers are crunched. Okay, so I would really like to see fields broken out. I know that that topic has come up, but to just have the fields rolled into this recreation facilities kind of hidden in there when, first of all, it sounds like they're the greatest revenue source within this, from what Rob DeGoss. If there's such a, I'd like to see them broken out if we can, because that's been a really big issue in terms of policy, recent policy that our commission has reset.
I think we could probably go back and segment some of the figures and provide it to you. I'm not so sure if, this would be something that we would segment to the point of the study. I mean, the study, it's like, how granular do you want should the study need to be? And maybe it does need to be at that level to make decisions, or maybe it does not. I mean, I don't think we know what the council's, where council will direct us. It maybe end up being that council also wants that granular level.
Well, council's interested in some council fields are a big topic right now, a really big topic. And so that's why I would advocate for it. And also it's just so lopsided from just a little bit that you've said tonight. So to just have it rolled in there masks really what's going on there. I think,
The easiest thing there might be for us to just put that revenue in the parks line item as a possibility.
You mean
for revenue.
put the fields in the,
Field revenue.
into the parks?
Yeah, into parks.
As long as, well, then we'd want to know that it's, that's where I thought it was originally when I looked at parks, but I think we want to see it, not have it in something. I just want to see it as a line item. Is
Well,
that-
it's always going to be against some type of expense, right? There's an expense and a revenue.
Right.
So it makes some sense for it to be in parks because that's where the maintenance of the fields, the cost of maintaining the fields.
Mm-hmm.
are.
Okay.
But the cost of brokering the fields, working with all the youth groups, is not in parks, it's in recreation facilities. So that's why there's, it could go on either, but I see the confusion.
And also, it's not just confusion, it's that it's hidden. We can't see what it is. We don't know what piece it is. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So is this the kind of input that's helpful for your committee?
This
Please
is
say
the-
slightly so we know we made some progress here.
This would be helpful with verbatim minutes.
You took great notes.
You
I'm
can't
worried.
summarize it in a page.
We try.
Okay, well, obviously, one of the big policy issues is we need to take a look at that indirect allocation and what the policy is there, because that drives globally any of these numbers. The other thing that I think we're saying, but I'd like to state the obvious, is that I don't think we would never come up with a motion that says everything should be at 99%. That's not what we're trying to accomplish in the city, and so we don't want to go there. And to the other end of the spectrum, some things should be free. So let's make sure. And I was saying to Council Schmidt before the meeting got underway, when it was during the recession and we were doing everything, looking at everything like draining lakes and putting in parking meters at any place a car would go to use the park facilities. And finally, we said, and council said, enough already. Some things have to be free. And I think that is definitely sort of the majority, unanimous opinion of this group. So that, just as a guideline, stating the obvious, perhaps.
One thing which is also kind of at this larger level, to bring back to the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, are we going to see how this, because we have to assess community values for some of these, which has to do with the placement. Once we have categories, we have to place things within categories for cost recovery. It gets to, it is related to what Chair Lowing was just talking about. Some things should be free, some things should not. We have this whole continuum. We're launching this effort to do this park and recreation master plan that is going to involve some community surveying for values. How are we going to be able to line these up at all? Or is this happening, or do we have to wait to the next cycle next time we look at this? Are we too off cycle?
Really important opportunity to talk about values, right? As we bring people together to talk about park system and recreation facilities, to be talking about these and values at the same time. That makes a lot of sense to me. So I'd like to see that happen as we bring on the consultant.
Okay, did you have something?
I do. in terms of the Community Services Department policy on your groupings, the benefit scale, I was gonna say it would be nice to know how the actual costs compare with your targets based on what falls into each group, but I understand now with the accounting difference, that's not gonna be a useful endeavor. I do think it would be useful for council and for the public to know CSD's position about which of these program areas fall into which group, just so we can have a sense of what the department's how values are related to each type of activity. Do you get what I'm saying?
I do, yeah.
So I think that kind of a designation would be helpful. Certainly, when you get to what programs go into which of the citywide categories, that would be something that would inform that decision. And that might also be where you want to identify other priorities that are not specifically tied to programs, but are nonetheless policy priorities like mentoring or that kind of thing that isn't a line on a spreadsheet. But I'm sure there are other things like that that are among the list of things that the city wants to be sure to prioritize through its fee structure and programming choices. Also, all the questions that we've all asked tonight are all about community needs assessment. And I really hope that the city considers seriously investing in a community needs assessment that's going to tell us whether our historical subsidies decisions are still supportable. It's going to tell us whether we're competing with groups that in areas that we shouldn't even be playing in, and we should send our resources elsewhere. It's going to tell us what people want that they're not getting, and how people are using what they already have in terms of city services. So I say again, I really hope that happens somewhere along the way. I know the Cubberley negotiations are moving forward someday soon. Maybe it'll come out of that. And I think it's really important to fill the data gaps and sort out the overhead accounting, as you said, so that council can understand the impacts of various fee adjustments on users. And of course, it should all be integrated into the long-range master plan.
Yeah, I just to the needs assessment question, I think the Parks and Recreation Master Plan is our best bet to get at some, maybe most, of what we want to get to with regard to the needs assessment. But I have not, received information or support around a community needs assessment. Just to be honest about that doesn't seem to be on the table at this point.
As I understood it, Policy and Services Committee tabled it until the Cubberley negotiations are over, but the discussion's not completely closed. And I think it's hugely important, and this is exactly why, because we can't answer any of these questions that we're all raising without that kind of information.
Yeah.
To follow along those lines, I had a similar question when we started this discussion about the report. We were talking about the values and desires of the community, and it does beg the question of, is it what we desire, or is it what we need, or is it what we have, is it what we want, and just that community input is essential in some format, and although I would prefer it in the format that Commissioner Headley is talking about with the community needs assessment, if the community feedback is being solicited for these other reasons, if we're getting it from the Parks and Rec Master Plan effort as well as this values and desires effort, if we're still getting the information, I think it can be useful, and I think that we would all like to be involved in that community feedback, to be kept in the loop of how that process is moving forward on the values and desires.
Which is a segue to the question is, how can we best be most helpful to you and Finance Committee and so on going forward on this?
Well, it's a good question. And maybe Councilmember Schmidt can help here. As the council and Finance Committee, and ultimately council, I guess, this commission reports to the council or advises council. So when this comes to council for any type of discussion or potential policy action, it would be helpful to have the commission's perspective on values. And I think Commissioner Headley said it well, and that there are sort of two questions about values. Values about how this gets structured in terms of a policy, and then values for types of programs and where they would fit in a structure like that. It could be helpful for council to have that when they are making a decision.
Is that something that a subgroup of this commission, could work on to provide something useful? If not, that's okay too, but looking to Councilor Schmidt, if you have any opinion on that.
I would think, just from my own perspective, a verbatim minutes of your discussion here tonight given to the Finance Committee before their next meeting on this issue would be very valuable. I mean, you've gone a layer down, you've asked questions, you've got responses. I think you have the staff perspective on where these things come from and how they grew, would be most valuable as a first step. I guess the second step is, do you have clear recommendations as a commission as to what program guidelines should be? You didn't discuss, try and reach consensus on that. But that's the next step the council will take, is, what are the guidelines we want to set? And you obviously have one perspective on it, but it's an important one. And I think a commission discussion of that and making recommendations to the council would be very important.
Okay, well, that may call for a ad hoc committee, and I think we have maybe a couple months to come up with that before it goes to council, October, November.
It'll go in November. Now, if we were to be able,
Goes to the Finance Committee in November.
yes. If we were to provide Finance Committee with minutes, is it that you think it would be at the November meeting or before the November meeting?
Available before the November.
So this commission probably would need to meet prior to approve such minutes as well.
Well, we meet October 22nd. And if
Yeah.
we can get the verbatim minutes, as we talked about earlier, that would be easier to do. And it can be included in whatever staff report goes to Finance Committee then. Although, there were a lot of questions this evening, more than answers, I think. So, I think it'll be helpful, I think, for context, but there's quite a lot more discussion and dialogue that needs to be had.
So let's discuss that in our ad hoc committee section and conclude the discussion at this point and see if we want to pick it up. I just like to say thank you. You were extraordinarily well prepared for all the questions. Really appreciate that. Not I'll get back to you, but an answer off the top of your head. Not even a stack of manila folders or anything. You had it all right up there. So really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lon.
Great.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a review of ad hocs. Past, present, and future, I guess. We have a speaker that requested to, from the public, that's requested to speak on one of the ad hoc creations. That's, slightly out of order, but I think we ought to just go ahead and do that before we get discussing more of our overall picture. So I'd like to ask Richard Brandt to come up and talk, and appreciate your patience for our other discussions.
Well, it's only 9:15, right? It's not the council meeting, at least, so.
Right.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Richard Brand, I live at 281 Addison, and I'm about a block away from Scott Park, and I appreciate I know that it's a general issue about ad hocs, but I did speak at the last meeting.
Yep.
And I'm also a member of the University South Neighborhood Group. We're just over here working on the parking thing tonight, too, so I'm multiplexing with meetings. But you did hear earlier Ms. Hogan talk about the success of Heritage Park, and that's a lively and very well-utilized park. Of course, now it's the termination point for the May Day parade, and it's wonderful. And I'll take a little bit of credit because our neighborhood group really fought to get that park established when the city didn't want it, didn't have any money. And as you heard, we basically had bake sales to get things set up. But it was a good utilization of community resources to do that. So that's a lively park. And so I and the juxtaposition between that and Scott Park, which I call a dead park, is just tremendous. It's amazing. My 3-year-old grandson, I walk him through from Heritage Park where he plays by Scott Park, and just last Friday he said, "Grandpa, why are there no swings here?" And he walks over to, there's one kind of horse sitting kind of askew on a spring, and he wants to ride that. The park really needs to be done, and so I know I've sent you some emails, and the neighbors are willing to help if the ad hoc is the way to do it. But we're really asking for fast tracking here because you saw my note, you saw my points. I think that some people want it to remain dead. It needs to be utilized. It's a park. That's what they're there for. I think we've got a good idea. We've got a couple of council people. I know Councilman Schmitz responded to me that are interested in doing something unique here. And so I guess I'm here to say I hope we can move this thing forward. I know there's still some questions to be added, but I don't want to see this drag on. So I would ask you, please, to move it fast. And I know Darren's put in a lot of work. I've talked to Darren about this. Again, my request here from the neighborhood group and from neighbors is, we got 85% approval on the thing. We've already gone out to the community outreach. I noticed that the agenda said community outreach, and I think we've already done that. You can speak to that tonight, and I'll defer to you there. But everybody I've talked to in my neighborhood is pretty excited about it. So I just wanted to bring that to the meeting tonight, and hopefully by next meeting, we'll have a approval here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think
Well, that's one of the things we have to talk about at the ad hocs, right?
Yeah, Darren Anderson is in this same position. He'd like to see the park renovated. He wants to move this along. But as you know, there's some different opinions about how the park ought to be designed. And so Darren's asked that three commissioners maybe help him work through the outreach that's been done to date and sort of think through, is it sufficient or does a little more need to be done? And try and bring it back quickly so a decision can be made and we can go to council for a park improvement ordinance and get this park rebuilt.
So before we get to that specific one, I just wanted to kind of set out this chart as to where we are right now on ad hocs and non-ad hocs, including just, sort of projects. This is the document that we came up with at our retreat, which was in, I believe, February, so this would have been March minutes. Does everybody have one? Yeah. Okay. So I just want to use this as kind of a working grid to say what's on the table now, and then think about which of these are inactive versus active, if we have to reactivate some or not, and then we can add to it. So we intentionally at the retreat said these were projects and issues, not necessarily ad hocs, and we actually didn't take any action on ad hocs there. So if you start at kind of well, I was going to start at the bottom, but let's start at the top. If you go down to, I would suggest that the following are some kind of ad hoc, active or inactive. And the first one on this list, I think, is Cubberley, which definitely was an ad hoc, but is now, I think, classified as inactive. Correct, Commissioner Hedderly? Right. Feeding wildlife was clearly an ad hoc, and that has been accomplished, so I think that goes to inactive. Golf course reconfiguration at the retreat, I think it was that we decided that could go to inactive at that point because our work was thought to be done. Golf course reconfiguration. And then the last one on the list, the last one in this chart is updating of the website. And that is an ad hoc that we created of Hedderly and Ashland, and I think we voted on it at the next meeting to make it official, is my recollection. But that's definitely an ad hoc and an active one. So in my review of it, and again, I'm just trying to kind of put some structure in place for discussion. The only active ad hoc right now is the website. And the others are definitely, commissioners that have responsibility to be, bird dogging the issues.
When you say active, are you defining that because people are currently calling meetings? Is that what you have defined? Because
My definition is that there's anything going on there, as opposed to, for example, the golf course, we intentionally said our work is done, so that one can go away.
I don't know if I agree with that. How we've decided whether the work is done or not done.
Well, we decided at the commission, at the retreat, that one was complete. And
that's why I didn't remember that. I just
Yeah.
knew that we stopped having meetings. I didn't know that it was based on a decision.
No, we actually did. And then one other thing I forgot to mention is that this is the uncorrected minutes that came back, this chart. So under field use policy, when it came back after the retreat, we pointed out in the corrected minutes that is not, it's very specifically not an ad hoc committee. That was just sort of folks to advise staff on things as it was going forward. Because that too was completed as a result of having come up with the new field policy through lots of work by commissioners. So all these things are I think all the rest of them are still on the list as, important things going forward, including Bixby and land bank and accessibility and so on. But just in terms of where we are with official structure, I think that's where we are.
Yeah, I guess I considered Bixby somewhat active still, so we have to we're going to discuss that tonight.
Yep.
Okay.
Ask a question. If these are these all necessarily ad hocs? Things like Project Safety Net. If there's more like liaison roles, Commissioner Markovich and I, were attending those as liaison. Is that the same, or is that different? That's different than an ad hoc, right?
Yes. Well, that's what I'm saying. The heading here was intentional at the retreat. We didn't want to call these ad hocs. We wanted to call these, important projects or issues that we wanted to keep aware of and have someone who was, had their nose in it all the time to see what, if we should do something, we want that person to raise the bell.
Okay, great, thanks.
So that's just, a bit of history. And then the issue is, what, if anything, maybe starting then with Scott Park, do we want to create ad hocs about to do offline activity as those usually happen? Scott Park's on the table. We can start with that if you like.
And it's a little similar. We did that for the sound in Lytton Plaza when we were having some trouble. That's, I think, a good example of where it worked.
Somewhere
when
here,
there was
I also
sort of
have
a clog in the pipeline.
That's really helpful to do that. And,
Yeah. Where did I put that piece
it
of
would
paper?
be, it'd be terrific if there was, a couple of commissioners or so that wanted to work on this with Darren.
Yeah, there were also some in 2012 that completed. One was Lytton Plaza amplified sound, bicycle pedestrian path, and those were ad hocs that came in and went out of existence. So I think you all know the issues on the, Scott Park. So if there are one or two people that would like to work on that.
I have some interest in that. I probably have more interest in the tree mitigation. I'm not sure if I want to be on both of those. What's the other interest?
Well, that's fine. That might be a better methodology, is just to kind of go through all these and see where we might
I think that might be good, so then people can sort of collect themselves where they want to put priorities.
Yeah. And then, yes, the tree mitigation plan, since you brought that one up, Keith, it seems to me like that fits under the, again, under the golf course reconfiguration project, and we could just reactivate that and add a third person. Oh, we have a third person.
No, one was missing.
Ed and Deirdre, and it looked like Abby. Yeah, I didn't recall that. So.
Oh, yeah, I didn't recall that either. I knew Daria had been on it.
Right. So if she's still interested in that, I don't want to put her on there just because she had to leave an hour early. That's not fair. But if she's still interested, we could just reconfigure that one, and that would take care of that. Other ones, I think, well, the website committee, that's going. Bixby, Jennifer, Deirdre,
I think
and
that's
Stacy.
still in a follow it, but there's not really any work for the commission as a whole at this point.
Right, we've had a couple meetings, and Darren is kind of following, it's a CIP, it's already been funded, correct, so he has the money. I think it's related to the tree mitigation a little bit, because what his CIP for is islands of vegetation, and that really relates to that concept of if we don't use the mitigation from the golf course for entirely all of it for trees, it would go into that shrubbery island ecosystem island concept that's going on currently at Bixby. So I think the two are somewhat related. So I think we should keep that going as a subcommittee in case we can intersect on tree mitigation issues.
Well, that's
Does that
fine,
make
because it's
sense?
staffed anyway. Well, we have,
Well, that raises a tricky question, though, if we have the golf course reconfiguration ad hoc looking at the tree mitigation, and we also have an active Bixby Hills design ad hoc, and they want to overlap, then we're gonna have some.
Maybe we need a separate tree
Potential
mitigation,
That's what I was thinking.
separate tree
because-
mitigation group.
Yeah, because some of the work with the golf course is done, I mean, the commission's worked on that project for 2 years in terms of site and design, but now there's this sort of specific issue, right, as the EIR is coming along, and the tree mitigation plan is something the commission is particularly interested in. And my preference, I think, would be that we call an ad hoc committee specifically to that, the tree mitigation plan for the golf course, which then could include Bixby Park, you know, as part of the solution, as well as on-site and potentially off-site mitigation.
I have one question about that. I was under the impression that Commissioner Cromie had some substantial concerns about the EIR process for the golf course. So that's why I thought that if that's something that she thinks is important to have ad hoc consideration of, then tree mitigation naturally goes along with that, because it's part of the EIR. But if not, if we're done with the EIR, then I'm fine with having a.
Well, yeah, the golf course isn't summed up in one sentence here, so it's on the table twice. So I think we have to really figure out how to handle the golf course. And I think Commissioner Hederly described it properly, that I do want to have some commission connection to the EIR as it goes forward, because I think we were left out of it before. And one reason I never spoke up about it is because I didn't know that EIR was covering the land bank. It was, that's a problem I had whenever it came before us informally. It was always referred to as a golf course reconfiguration, and the language of the Baylands Athletic Center expansion wasn't used, which didn't tip us off. Because, so whatever, that's already, I just want to move forward with it and not lose sight of it.
I just don't remember it that way, because I just have presented on this so many times and have always said that the 10.5 acres was part of the EIR process. And we're recognizing there isn't a project yet, so it's not going through site and design review, but it was always part of the EIR, and it was never hidden,
and the document's public, of course, so.
Yeah,
it's just-
Even when I looked at the document, it wasn't titled, I didn't even pick it up looking at it online, because it was titled as the heading, the document was titled Golf Course Reconfiguration when it first showed up. And later on, it was given a subtitle. It's been very confusing.
So let's
Very
come back to the present then. So relative to any remaining EIR issues on the golf course, does her suggestion work, that because of its EIR on the golf course, it could be part of the golf course reconfiguration? Or are you saying that tree mitigation?
Well, I see two potential ad hoc committees with respect to the golf course. And one is specific to the tree mitigation, which is going to be some pretty intensive work, just that. And the other is the 10.5 acres and what we're going to do with that, although that's part of the Park and Rec master plan, I think. that could be an ad hoc committee, but an ad hoc committee just about the golf course generally, I don't think that's specific enough for me. What does that mean? What is included in that?
Well, yeah, my only thing on that was that it's just a piece of the golf course reconfiguration that's still ongoing, and so that's why it fit there. That's the only reason I was suggesting it. And relative to the land bank, that's longer-term policy issues. That's not just the EIR, and we've got a couple of people that are designated as, the ones looking at that particular issue. Because that's going to take, years. It's not just the EIR. It's not just the EIR about, because there's all kinds of stuff in the EIR that, may never be built. It's just there as kind of a wish list to get opinions on, so, environmental opinions on, environmental impacts.
It's, the EIR, included the 10.5 acres as sort of most intensive use of that possible space. And, the hope was there was some efficiency from doing that. And, but again, there's a lot more public outreach that needs to occur as to what we're gonna build there and what's, of highest interest to the community. Now, the council seems to have gone on record to say the playing fields, right? So it's no secret that, in fact, they told us to design a golf course that allowed for playing fields, so that's why we did that. But the commission has been very clear about, they would like to see, and I think rightly so, some really solid analysis about what is the highest need in the community.
Oh, community needs again?
Well,
Community
no,
needs
yeah,
again?
no, it's really,
Yeah.
it is true. So, and this is a unique opportunity to add 10.5 acres to the park and recreation system. I mean,
You can do it without knowing anything.
right, so I think that's very, very sensible that we do that, but, so there's a lot of work to be done there, and certainly the Parks and Rec master plan will help with that. But you never know how long, if with the Park and Rec master plan and we start to develop a compelling vision for something that could be built out there, someone may come forward and help us actually do it. So I don't know, hopefully at least not years away before we build that out.
So should we just call it the golf course EIR and tree mitigation plan? Does that provide you the more specifics you're looking for? Are you looking for two separate groups? What do you want?
That would do it from the tree mitigation plan. I don't know, the other issue around the EIR and the 10.5 acres, it's a related but separate topic, it seems to me.
I think we should have golf course reconfiguration and have tree mitigation fall under that, and then have it exactly how it's on here, so that the tree mitigation really falls under the golf course reconfiguration project. Isn't that, is a tree mitigation falling under this land bank?
No.
Not
Definitely
really.
not.
So I think it should just be, that's what it is. It's the golf course reconfiguration project tree mitigation.
Because we wouldn't be doing the mitigation if there wasn't a new golf course coming.
Exactly. It's really connected to that, and I just think it has, that's where I would.
And I agree with you, Rob, that there's not much more to do on the golf course, which is why we made this inactive, last February. But the EIR popped up and the tree mitigation is real, so.
Yep. That works.
And then I still think we have a separate issue that's longer term and more strategic about that land bank, so we should keep that separate.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
And I would say we should not have a active ad hoc on the Bixby Hills design at this point until something comes up that needs to be considered by the full commission. So I think I know you and I are on it, Deirdre, and Stacy, all three of us are. So I think it makes sense for us to keep following it.
Right.
But I don't want to create a Brown Act conflict potential that's completely unnecessary because nothing's really happening.
That's fine.
Is that okay with you?
Then we can just reconvene it if something starts happening on it. And we can still be included on meeting notices. And
Right.
That's fine.
Okay, so the existing reconfigured golf course ad hoc committee had been allowing Cromie and Knopper, I guess. So, and it now adds tree mitigation and EIR. So, I mean, we don't have to keep it this way. I'm happy to stay involved and,
Well, we can also revisit who's on the subcommittee. I mean, Commissioner Rector expressed an interest to be on this.
that's what I'm saying.
Right, so I think we should keep it as is, but maybe we should reconsider who's on it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, good,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I said I'm happy to stay on it. If Abby wants it, maybe she can arm wrestle with you for the third slot or something like that, or anyone else that wants to.
My inclination would be, if Abby's still interested, just keep the status quo. But if for whatever reason she's not interested, I'd be willing to fill in.
Okay.
Do we want to ask her, or maybe Chair Long, you can give her a call
Yeah,
and
yeah.
ask her that Commissioner Rector was interested?
Yeah.
And then we can move along. Because there's going to be activity between now and next month on this topic.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, one thing we should have also put on the to-do list for ad hocs is probably master plan. I don't know if we should do that tonight, but I know that you've got the,
It's on here, but it has to be, it's Parks and Recreation Master Plan has to be redone on here. I'm the only, we
That was-
decided not to do that.
that was just, that was just
the RFP.
for the RFP. Yeah, and that's done, so.
Yeah, so I think the entire commission wants to be involved in the Parks and Rec master plan. And in fact, once we get into that with the needs assessment, a variety of things that's gonna happen, there's probably gonna be, 2 or 3 ad hoc committees specific to that work.
So when do we need those? Do we want to look at that tonight, or should I
I
talk
don't
with
think
you
so.
offline about what a good structure would be, 3 here and 3 there, and?
Yeah, and we gotta get the consultant on board. I think the consultant's been selected now, and we're preparing the report to go to council to get approval
Okay.
to get them working.
So that's not something we're going to do tonight, then?
But I can report back to say it was a really great process to interview these consultant firms, and I think we made a really good choice. There's good consensus. It's exciting.
Good. Okay, so then, the only thing currently on the table is to staff the Scott Park ad hoc with at least 1 or 2.
Well, you said the only thing on the table, but, so are we assuming we've disbanded Bixby Hills Design, Feeding Wildlife, Field Use Policy? I'm putting little zeros. Can we just go right through the list and say what we've disbanded and what we have not?
We already
Yeah,
did.
we did.
Well,
They
co-
were expanded in the first place.
Right, so we're just-
They're
so-
expanded and that they're
and-
inactive.
And so, but because we're calling them projects and issues, we're going to leave them on this list. Is that the idea? Okay.
Right.
So I'd like just one summary of what ad hocs are active, just so we can all.
Website and golf course reconfiguration.
And I would just say the feeding wildlife, because, there was some controversy and there wasn't unanimous decision, it still has to go to council, so the ad hoc committee might, it's not quite over with its work, I think. We'll leave them at the
They're in limbo.
council meeting, for that final piece. I guess the chair of the commission could play that role too, though, I suppose.
Okay, so, back to Scott Park.
What is the?
The commitment.
Yeah.
You don't have to put in the bocce court if you get on this.
I don't have, no hard labor.
No.
I'm interested in that. Put me down for that. I'm just curious on what the path forward for Scott Park is. This is to assess what.
Darren wants to meet about, should we do more community outreach or not?
Just want someone to look at what we've done and say, reasonable person, is that enough?
Some of the commentary about, is that the right place for bocce court versus a different park?
Okay.
Is there enough room there? If we put the court in, should we take out basketball hoops or picnic tables? How do you make all these priorities work and come up with here's the right proposal?
Okay.
It could come back to the same proposal that's on the table.
Yeah,
And what's the best way to move forward and how fast?
okay. Okay, I am willing to do that.
And how many is an ad hoc?
It can be-
Is one enough?
It can get up to 3.
1 to 3.
2 or 3?
Yeah. Okay, we can leave it at 1, see if someone else wants to join.
So Keith, I'm not wild about that particular topic, but if you decide that you are too lonely on your own, I'm willing to join you, just let me know.
I think it would be helpful,
I'm actually kind of interested, in it too. I think it's a precedent setter.
It's a small pocket, it's interesting problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is.
Or opportunity, you can look at it. But I think having more than one commissioner is,
Yeah.
It's always nice.
yeah.
And I can
In
walk.
some ways,
I can
if it's
walk
only
there.
one commissioner, it doesn't have to be an ad hoc.
Yeah, it does.
It still does?
Yeah.
I mean, you work.
You're representing the,
There's a certain
The-
responsibility
So did,
you carry
But-
when you're an ad hoc of one.
did you want to be on it then, Jennifer? Or-
Yeah, if Rob thinks we need more than one person, I'm willing to be on
You'll
it.
like it. It'll be interesting.
Community needs on.
I think it'll be good, because I think, in other words, the one commissioner sort of carries a pretty heavy load then in terms of, and staff does look, to input and guidance and wants to have a real dialogue. And this is a tricky one, because there are really different opinions about what to do here.
Yep.
So. That's right.
Okay.
Well, before we leave this agenda item,
We're not going to leave it.
Are
Are we done with the specifics of the?
Designating ad
Yeah.
hoc.
Because what I was going to say is that we also need to understand how these items from ad hocs come back to the commission. And essentially, some of this is, recap, and some of it's for new commissioners, but essentially, there's two ways to do it. One is that an ad hoc committee can say that I want something on the agenda for next month, telling Rob or me that, because we have to talk about this, and suggest if it's an action or information, as usual. Or they can report out in this latter stage where we have reports. The alternative is just, any commissioner can say, hey, I haven't heard about Bixby for a while, so, one person can call that person that's on Bixby and say, what's going on? There's that much going on, well, can we please put it on the agenda? So I want to kind of get the two-way responsibility going here. The folks that are members of that committee should take primary responsibility for disseminating information at the right time or action. But it can also come from a commissioner, so it's not like pocket vetoed. They can't, we can't bring it unless they say it's ready to come out of committee. So I think that's the basic, approaches in the way to do it. Yeah.
And if there's something of substantive, for substantive discussion, it should always be on the business agenda, not just an update.
Right.
So the updates are really just supposed to be for updates,
Right, and
as opposed to discussion.
the important point there is that notifies the public
Right.
that there's more substantive discussion that's to be had on that issue.
Right.
Yeah, good ad.
and it lets us really discuss it, because what I realized is that otherwise, I think we really are supposed to just be reporting on it if it's not delineated as a business item. And I think that,
Yeah, we can't take
Flip-
action unless it's agendized that way.
well, not even action, I mean discussion, back and forth discussion.
It's a little looser.
Well, this way it'll be better.
I'm inclined to be more specific.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm ready to leave that agenda item. Anyone else have that? Okay, so we're on to comments and announcement. I think Councilor Schmidt has a comment on El Camino Park. Your audience is excited about this one.
The chair has been asking over time. I've had conversations with the mayor and the city manager about it. They are both aware of the fact that they owe the Parks and Rec Commission a response. They need council action, so it has to be an action item on the council. It has not yet been set, but I talked to the mayor again yesterday, and he's aware and working on getting it on the agenda. I guess the tricky part is it reopens the 27 University issue, and I think they want to make a segmented decision on this rather than to get it involved in the whole discussion of 27. But the goal is, at least there should be an announcement in the next 2 or 3 weeks that it will be on the council agenda. And the goal is to recognize that you have to make decisions on the park development, and it's holding up your calendar for the year. So hopefully you'll see it soon. I did want to make one other comment. I wore my shirt from the run the other night, and I think it's a great example of community involvement. There are like 3,000 people out there, and it occurred to me after our discussion on the benefits of subsidizing community activities. Here's an opportunity. We live in a diverse city, and to get out there with your neighbors, with the community on a community-long thing is an experience that is good for everybody in the city. And, to have those types of things is a value, not just for those who are entering, but for the community as a whole. And I just wanted to share that, as well as, thanks for the rec department for putting it on and making everything run so well. It's a great opportunity.
See you out there running. Yeah, it's another event where we include a lot of teams, actually. They come and help be course monitors, and we probably have 70 teenagers. A lot of the teens come out and help with that and cheer the runners. And we place them in the 5K walk, the 5K run, and the 10K. And they're out in the middle of the Baylands for a couple of hours, and they do great. It's really a good event.
Yes, you cannot get lost, even though it's dark.
Okay, other comments and announcements?
Well, you're probably all curious about Mitchell Park Community Center and Library. And, public works staff are working very, very hard to try and get that building open. And Phil Bogle, in particular, Assistant Director of Public Works, is doing, I think, an outstanding job at just cracking the whip out there every day. And we had an opportunity to initiate the basketball court. We had Jeremy Lin come and play
really?
there, and that was really fun. So, and we had some kids out there to participate in that program. But it's coming together, and the hope is, by the end of the calendar year, we'll be in there. And so we're working hard on an opening celebration, and Abby's part of that group. And but there is still an opportunity if you're interested in doing a tour. There's one coming up on October 4th, which I think is next Friday. If you would like to join the tour, I think it's at 3 o'clock, that tour. And then there's also on this Friday, that one's a little busier, so the preference is for next Friday. But if you can't make next Friday and you'd like to do it, we can fit you in this Friday.
And they're both at 3?
Yes. I'll follow up with an email if you'd like, and then you can just.
Where do you meet for that?
Meet at the center, at the back end of the center where it comes out into the park. There's trailers there.
Okay, the trailers.
Yeah, and you have to, we provide a vest and helmet, you have to wear closed-toed shoes and pants, not dresses and things. Yes, when you get in trouble otherwise. So anyway, that was it.
Okay. Anything on the golf course?
Well, a lot happens
Plays?
on the golf course, or I should say, not enough happening.
Not enough is happening, yeah.
Because we have now temporary conditions, so we're bringing in soil and stockpiling, although we'd like to see more soil coming as well. But in the event, we've got soil coming in, which is good. But we have, a couple of temporary greens. The course actually is still playing really well right now, but we're seeing a significant drop in play, more than 50%, actually. And so that's a big concern. It's more of a drop in rounds than we had anticipated.
In what period?
In the last 6 weeks.
Oh, I see.
And we also aerified all the greens where we pulled plugs, and so that impacts play because the greens are bumpy and so on. But they're largely repaired now, so we're meeting with Brad Lazarus, who's the golf professional on site, really is our marketing person for the golf course, plus the restaurant owner, and Ballycrest, our maintenance crew, tomorrow morning at 9 with city staff to figure out how we can turn this around. We'll likely have to discount even deeper than we thought we would, just to get people out on the course, because they're playing just fine. I mean, it's largely the same, but there seems to be the message is out that we're down, or we're under construction, and so we're not seeing the kind of play that we'd like to see. So we may have to do some sort of creative discounting, really steep discounting, just to get people out there saying it's just too good a deal to miss, and then they'll realize, oh, this is not so bad at all, and we can bring the prices up again a little bit.
Yeah, I was out there a couple weeks ago with my son and reported into Rob on that on a Sunday, and there were holes open in front and in back of us. And on the peninsula, that just does not happen. One guy that teed off in front of us said that he tried to get on his course, the public course in San Mateo, a day before, and it was totally jammed. And he called up, and he could get any time he wanted at the Muni. I called up that day, and I could get any time I wanted on a Sunday, which is just dreadful. It's a lot shorter. You know, there's like long fours that are now 2 par 3s, so it's changed a lot. The slope is down, the range is down.
Around the golf.
It is.
Like, and it's already a 25% discount over, Shoreline.
What's the closure date? April?
April, which is a long way from now. And,
Yeah.
So we need to turn that. We really need to turn that around. So
It's a
that's-
serious budget issue.
Yeah, and then the other big thing on the golf course, we talked about the tree mitigation plan, and that is the other, for me, I think is sort of a critical path. We need to get that right and make sure that the communities and the various stakeholders are comfortable with the plan. And so I know Walter Passmore is working on that. He's going to be pulling the team together again here in the next week or so, and he'll know to bring this group, this committee, the ad hoc, to be part of that working group.
Okay.
We are going to have, this is kind of interesting, and I don't know, this is sort of out of my area a little bit, but there is significant natural areas going to be built into the golf course. As you've seen, there's 50 additional acres of native areas and pretty significant enhanced ecosystem from what we have today. And there is a way to value that, and that's going to be an important piece, I think, of the mitigation plan, that we actually have a number of what that really means. What is the dollar value of that, and how does that relate to tree mitigation? So we were meeting today with 2 different firms that do that kind of valuation, and so over the next couple of weeks, that'll be happening.
So you're valuing the value of having open space within the golf course.
Right, and natural
Restored
area.
it to its natural.
Yeah.
And how does that help us? I mean, what is that, if you know the value of that, then how can you use that?
Well, it plays into the mitigation plan for the tree removal. It's just like, you can, it's not just about canopy replacement. Although that's sort of where we started. We thought really the best thing to do is just, because people care so much about trees, we need to replace full canopy.
Oh, tree for tree.
Tree for tree.
And now you're saying,
trees, 3 for 1.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. It was 1 for 1, but it's canopy replacement within 10 years. Full canopy replacement, which is planting a lot more trees than what
you
exists.
can trade trees for open space.
There is value. So as Commissioner Cromie said as well, they're looking at Bixby Park as a possibility. So there's interest. What we're hearing from the community as they give us feedback on a plan, that on-site, near-site mitigation, may be better than really off-site. Like and maybe we're going to do all 3, but what is appropriate in Bixby Park may not be significant trees. It may be a different type of ecosystem enhancement to rebuild Bixby Park, and there's value to that. And so we're having folks help us with defining that value. And some of that is also on the golf course itself, which is now 130 acres of managed turf, and it'll be 80 acres of managed turf with additional 50 acres of native areas, natural areas, and that has important value. So we're going to have Walter back here in October, and some of the commissioners will be working with him between now and then to talk more about that.
Okay.
It'll be October 22nd.
Any other comments?
No, that's.
Other commissioners have comments or announcements?
I just have an announcement that the bears that are coming to Hoover Park, the public art project, is coming very soon. I'm not sure exactly when they're going to be installed. I think they might have begun already, but they're trying to put together a dedication ceremony. Hold the date for Thursday, October 3rd at 4 p.m. if you're interested in going and celebration of the new bears. It's 3 little bears and 1 mama.
What was the date for that?
October 3rd, 4 p.m.
Don't feed them if you go.
Yeah.
Feeding the wildlife.
Yeah, October 3rd at 4 p.m.
Okay.
Okay, so is,
Oh, I have a couple things.
oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
On the handout that we get, the important dates, it has one of the dates wrong. Our meeting on November 26th, we voted,
Just what I was gonna bring up.
oh, okay. We-
I'm
that-
gonna plan out some of these other meetings, so.
November 19th, right? That is still the date, right?
Yeah, the other issue there is that the December 9th, is the joint study session with council. And of course, we, being free agents, we can also schedule a separate commission meeting if we want to. I would suggest that we kind of hold on that until we get to November and see if we're overflowing with work, or if that's gonna be the December meeting.
What do you mean, having meet us instead of the joint study session?
In addition,
In
if we're busy and we have stuff to do, we can schedule another meeting in addition to the joint study session.
Gotcha.
That's my suggestion. So in other words, just leave this as is and not add another meeting right now. Back to you.
Okay. And my other one was Cubberley. We were planning to close the showers. Is that done? Is that?
That did happen. So the Cumberley showers are officially closed. And also the ordinance to have a closure time for community facilities, including Cumberley, just like we have with parks from 10:30 to sunrise, has been approved and had its second reading. So now we're in a period of 30-day. When you pass any ordinance, there's 2 readings and then 30 days before it takes effect. There's an appeal period. So that takes effect October 10th. And so still working closely with a task force called the Homeless Services Task Force that emerged out of the discussion of the Living in Vehicles ordinance, and to see if they could provide or lend a hand in providing advice about how may we support the unhoused, given some of these transitional changes that are happening at Cumberley. And so we plan to go to council on October 7th to discuss that with the city council, and we have a recommendation from the task force. So that's something that you may want to pay attention to or come to. We've seen a significant drop in the unhoused that are at Cumberley now, we have police that are there every evening still, and that's been very helpful.
And do we know where they've gone? They've gone to the Opportunity Center, or they've got just dispersed?
We've had the downtown streets team there frequently. Envision Shelter Network's been very helpful, so they've gone to a variety of places, including Project We Hope in East Palo Alto. So and some of them have been arrested. We've had issues of drug dealing and other things that the police have become more aware of because they've been on campus, and so there's been numerous arrests as well.
Okay, any other comments or announcements anywhere? Okay, let's move on to the tentative agenda for the October 22nd meeting.
So
Rinconada?
Rinconada Park Master Plan is coming back. There was a community meeting, was that last week? A week or 2 ago. I didn't see any commissioners there.
No, nobody could go.
Oh, yeah.
I polled everyone, I think. No one could make it. Oh.
It was a good meeting, but we had some new people that were there and hadn't been part of any of the previous meetings, so that, like, bringing up all sorts of new things, and so that was kind of interesting. But yeah, no, I think I think you're gonna be impressed with how it looks and what the final design is. So they'll be back. The plan is to have the tree mitigation topic come back for the golf course for discussion.
Walter.
And he'll be here also for a second item, the urban forest master plan, to get input from the commission on how that
joint council session should probably be
Yep.
on the list. We have to plan for that when we have
Yeah.
1 month in between.
At least to structure it, that's right.
How about the Parks and Rec master plan, now that we have hired someone, we should probably know the next steps.
Yeah, I'd love to see that be on here. Move that along.
Does the golf course EIR, it was still in draft phase? Does it
It is.
go through another phase? Does it?
The next step, oh geez, I'm fairly new to the EIR process myself, but, so right now, it's in a draft format. We've received all the comments, and, ICF, Chopra, and others are responding to all of the comments received. And so, that needs to be made public. I don't think they're finished with doing the analysis and responding to all those comments. It's gone to the Planning Transportation Commission twice. It goes to the City Council in December is the plan. Yeah.
And we may or may not have a Scott Park item, depending on what happens in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good start. 6 meaty issues.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the coffee.
We're starting at 4, I think, to get through that.
I thought we'd be done by 9 o'clock tonight.
Yeah. I move we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Stand adjourned, thank you.